The August 12, 2020 Prosper Portland Board of Commissioners meeting is now convened. And Pam, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Platt?
Here.
Commissioner Gambetti?
Here.
Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley? You're muted, Commissioner, if you are there.
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Oh, and we can see you much better now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Myers?
Here.
And Chair Cruz?
Here. Thank you, Pam. All right, I have a brief notice to read. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing, Prosper Portland is holding this meeting electronically as allowed by state law. All members of the commission are attending remotely by phone or computer, and Prosper Portland has made several avenues available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The public can also provide written testimony to the commission by emailing feigenbutzp@prosperportland.us. Again, that's FEIGENBUTZP @ prosperportland.us. All right, so I'll start with commissioner reports, but I would first like to welcome Commissioner Serena Stoudemire Wesley. This is her first board meeting, so we're super happy to have her, and we just welcome her to the commission and thank her in advance for her hard work and her dedication, and really glad to have you on board. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'd also like to acknowledge that Commissioners Platt and Gambetti have both been reappointed by the City Council. So of course, we're really happy to have you back too. So thank you so much. And Willie, thank you as always, my friend, for being here. All right. So would anybody like to say anything for a commissioner's report this time? I'll just start off that way.
I just want to echo your welcome. Welcome, Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley. Looking forward to getting to know you on this commission.
Thank you. And likewise, I'm looking forward to getting to know each and every one of you. So excited about that.
Great. Anybody else have anything they'd like to report in the way of activities or anything or comments? If not, we'll go on to the executive director report.
I have a couple of quick reports on some events I participated in. On 7/14, I attended a listening and brainstorming session about addressing racism in the construction industry, which was hosted by the National Association of Minority Contractors and featured Commissioner Myers on the panel. It was a really powerful session, very informative. On July 15th, I attended a listening session with Black and African-American business owners in the childcare industry, which was hosted by the City of Portland and Prosper Portland, also in partnership with the Child Care Resource and Referral of Multnomah County and Neighborhood House. I know Tori Campbell was a part of that and a few others from Prosper. On July 23rd, I attended a webinar addressing what is really keeping people of color out of the construction and real estate industry, which was hosted by CREW, which is the Women in Construction and Real Estate. Also a really good session. And then real quick, I just wanted to recognize that, we've reached what I think is the 77th day of continued demonstrations across the city, calling for racial justice. And we're seeing our city leading the nation in this call for change. And I'm really hopeful that we're also leading in action and results. So I've attended a number of events around town focused on this, including pretty regularly a kid-centered March for Racial Justice, which is held every Tuesday night at Sunnyside School Park. And I just want to note there's a lot of really positive opportunities for our community, including our kids, to listen and learn and support this effort while safely wearing masks and maintaining social distance. So that's the end of my report.
That was great. Thank you very much, and thanks for attending all of those events. That's fabulous. Any other comments?
No, just welcoming Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley as well. Hopefully, when we're open back up for on-site business, I'd love to host you to a lunch at Andina. We can chat and get to know each other. But until then, we'll find some other virtual way to do it. So, welcome.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorite places, the empanadas.
Thank you. Yeah, oh yeah, my favorites too.
One more quick welcome from me as well.
Thanks, Francesca. Nice to see you in person and not over the phone, not talking over the phone. It's great to see a voice, put a voice with a face. So yes.
All right. Well, Pam, I'm going to send you a couple of dates for a couple of things I participated by Zoom call. But with that, I'll just pass it along to Executive Director Branham.
Good afternoon, Chair Cruz and Commissioners. Welcome, Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley, and thank you all for your commitment to continue to serve. We have a really full agenda, so I'm just going to note a few important updates since your last meeting in June. On July 23rd, City Council approved the plan to distribute $114 million in federal CARES relief funding to support public health, people experiencing houselessness, for renters, and for other sectors hit hardest by the economic shock of the pandemic. Prosper Portland will receive $15 million to distribute with partners through the Small Business Relief Funds. Applications for grants up to $25 million will open in early September. You'll hear more from the team about the priorities and the process later in this meeting, but want to make sure that people know you can visit our website or email us to sign up for more information so you know when the applications open at prosperportland.us/relief. Another opportunity is being brought forward by Portland Athletic and Outdoor, Mercatus, and Portland Made, who are seeking Portland-based consumer good companies to be part of Portland Supply from Tuesday, September 1st to Friday, September 4th. Portland Supply is a time-based collaborative online market designated to and designed to showcase Portland brands to a global audience of wholesale buyers during a time in which trade shows have been canceled or postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can go to aoportland.com for more information. We recently found out that Prosper Portland's community engagement work in Old Town Chinatown, in partnership with JLA Public Involvement, has earned a Core Values Award as a Diversity, Inclusion, and Cultural Project of the Year from the International Association for Public Participation. The engagement process supported planned redevelopment of 2 key sites in the historic neighborhood. A culturally specific, community-centric approach was apparent throughout the process, and we know that the community goals will be reflected in the final project. So congratulations to JLA, as well as our own Eric Jacobson, Bernie Karofsky, Talia Martinez, Lisa Abwaf, and everyone who was involved in this accomplishment. I want to bring your attention to 2 short films from a local filmmaker that we've worked with, Karina Ripper, that premiered just last week in her new La Tienda series. La Tienda, the shop, profiles 2 Portland Latinx businesses. The films share their personal stories, cultural origins, artistic influences, and what keeps them going as business. They were filmed pre-COVID by a talented local crew made up of a majority of Latinx, female, and LGBTQ identifying folks. For more information and to view the films, which I highly recommend, you can go to fortripper.com. And finally, in really sad news, we recently lost a beloved City of Portland colleague and racial equity champion, Tony Lamb, earlier this month. We joined the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and his family and his colleagues and all those who loved him in mourning his passing and celebrating his legacy. We first got to know Tony when he was the 2nd employee at the Rosewood Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative, and strengthened our connections while he was a member of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So we are keeping him and his memory close to our hearts. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Cruz.
Thank you. All right. So next up, would someone like to make a motion to approve the June 10, 2020 minutes?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. Everyone in favor, please wave or say aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. Okay. Next up, we have public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any additional public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have a consent agenda. Number of items. There's one item which I've discussed offline with a few of the commissioners. I would just say if anybody wants to discuss that, please speak up now and we can move that item. That's item 11. We can move that to the end of the meeting and we'll do it after all of our other items just to be courteous to our guests. Otherwise, if there are no additional comments, then I would ask for a motion to approve all of the items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. You have a second? All right. All those in favor of the consent agenda items, then would you please say aye and or wave, and we'll try to approve them that way. Okay.
Aye.
All right. They pass unanimously then. Thank you very much. All right. Next up, we have the election of officers. And I believe that Commissioner Myers is going to handle that. Can't hear you, Willie.
Unmute. Yeah. First lesson of Zoom. I'd like to nominate the following officers for chair, Chair Cruz, for vice chair, Commissioner Gambetti, and for treasurer, Commissioner Platt. Hey, you're on mute.
Sorry, thanks. Do we have a second?
I second.
Great, thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, okay. So that motion passes. Thank you, Commissioner Myers, for that. And congratulations, everybody. Okay, next up, we have an actual action item, and this is approving the Broadway Corridor Community Benefit Agreement, and I'll read the whole thing. Authorizing a disposition development agreement with Continuum Partners LLC and a community benefits agreement with the Healthy Communities Coalition, and requesting and recommending various city council actions to facilitate the development of the Broadway Corridor. So Sarah Harpole and Roger Gonzalez will present, and then we'll have invited testimony from a number of presenters.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sarah Harpole from the Development and Investment Department at Prosper Portland, and I'm joined today by Roger Gonzalez with our Equity, Governance, and Communications Department. We are here to present several items related to the Broadway Corridor. Next slide. As we get started, we want to provide a couple definitions around geography. So we often refer to the Broadway Corridor, which is the area shown here in green. At its heart is the approximately 14-acre former post office property that we acquired in partnership with the Portland Housing Bureau. Prosper Portland also owns a number of sites within the study area, including the Broadway Bridge site, Union Station, Block Y, and Block R. The actions before you today really are specific to the post office site itself. However, there are kind of embedded implications potentially for the Broadway Bridge site and Block R as well. So just calling out the distinction between the Broadway corridor and the post office property proper. Next slide, please. We do have 3 rather significant items before you today. So that is seeking your authorization of the Disposition and Development Agreement with Continuum Partners, a community benefits agreement with Healthy Communities Coalition, and seeking your recommendation to City Council for their parallel approval of also of these agreements and an investment strategy. Next slide, please. We're going to spend some time walking through briefly the milestones that brought us to where we are today, as well as then walking through the framework or the combination of agreements and plans that are necessary to move our planning work into implementation, and those are really at the heart of the actions before you today. I do want to acknowledge that it is a lot of information and we have several very dense slides, so we'll try to walk through the key details of those. But as we work through the chapters within this presentation, also pausing for clarification, but please stop us along the way as well if helpful, and then we of course will come back to further questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Most importantly though, starting with a very significant thank you. There have been an overwhelming number of people who have touched this project over the course of the last several years. First and foremost, our 42-member steering committee who was with us over an 18-month period, investing their time and expertise and guidance in this project. We had over 1,000 public comments through a combination of open houses, online surveys, and other forums. Continuum Partners has been with us over the long haul as well as our development advisor throughout our planning process, and then as a negotiating partner through the community benefits and development agreement discussions. We have a robust consultant team led by a combination. We have the master planning team led by ZGF and their sub-consultants. We have benefited from the expertise of Laura Media and Bill Lennertz in our community engagement process. Notably, Cecilia Estelano of Estelano Advisors and her expertise in guiding us through the community benefits process, and many more. I also want to acknowledge we have had over 50 staff members from various city bureaus touch this work, and I think we've touched every department within the Prosper Portland, within Prosper Portland as well. And then importantly, the many members of the Healthy Communities Coalition who have been with us and engaged in this project in many ways through its, since its initiation and then through agreements. And then also just personally acknowledging Roger and his partnership and expertise as a fellow co-pilot over the past year as we have moved through the negotiation process. Next slide, please. Really our most recent phase of work started in May of 2017 with the kickoff of our steering committee. From the beginning, they were instrumental in informing the guiding principles and kind of the North Star of this project that we have continued to use as a decision-making framework over the past several years. They were with us and advised us in the selection of Continuum Partners as our development advisor and negotiating partner. And then they were with us along with our technical partners as we rolled up our sleeves and started to identify and refine and evolve our master plan concept for the area. So this collectively has been about 2 years of work. The past year has been focused on agreements then of the negotiations and the technical aspects of the master plan that really support and deliver on that vision that we collectively set forth. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the guiding principles really were established at the get-go and have been serving us to be mindful of who is benefiting and how people are benefiting from our work, ensuring that the project is accountable and transparent to our collective goals and agreements, that we're thinking about the connection to the surrounding area and accessibility for all to this site, ensuring that we are leading with the racial equity lens and promoting social equity, furthering a focus on wealth creation and leadership and sustainability, and then ensuring that we are creating a comfortable, vibrant, welcoming space for all. Next slide, please. As we shift from the planning phase and look to implementation, we often have kind of categorized it within 4 bodies of work. I think of the master plan as the kind of roadmap or guidance of what can be built. And then the combination of the development agreement, the community benefits agreement, and our city partnerships and investment strategy as the how it will be done. We are taking our master plan for a second hearing before Design Commission tomorrow in hopes of seeking approval of that. And then we, of course, are before you today with seeking your authorization of the development agreement, the community benefits agreement, and the investment strategy, and hopeful to seek City Council's consideration and approval in September. We're going to briefly kind of walk through these 4 key chapters and how these work together to further it. And these really, again, are kind of the heart of the actions before you today. Next slide. Next slide. So as mentioned, we are taking the master plan for our second hearing tomorrow before Design Commission. Quickly, the master plan really is a requirement of several significant central city sites to ensure that the urban form is consistent and positively contributing to the surrounding character and context of the neighborhood, and then has a strong emphasis on the delivery of adequate infrastructure, streets, open space, utilities to support that development. Notably, it does not prescribe specific building design or uses. We are very intentional both through the master planning process and in our negotiations with Continuum of recognizing and appreciating that this is a 20-year build out potentially of this project, and we need that flexibility to be able to be responsive to evolving market forces. Next slide. The master plan, though, does prescribe the location and configuration of open space. It calls for the maximum building envelope or glass box in which individual developments can occur, and of which future developers and their design teams have scoped based on their known program at the time. And then, as I mentioned, it addresses the adequacy of infrastructure, both in terms of transportation impacts, but also looking at the feasibility of actually constructing the streets and the utilities as they are called for in the master plan through the development of preliminary engineering plans. Next slide. I do want to call out, because this is the Green Loop's role, because it has been kind of critical and central to both our master planning efforts, but also at the heart of our development agreement negotiations. The Green Loop is a network of bike and pedestrian pathways that make a loop and connect across the central city. Within the context of the post office property, it really enters into the site at the south through a large open space, and it starts to make a transition in grade from being at grade to about 16 feet when it meets the midpoint of the site as it reaches that northern boundary of that open space. From there, it crosses over Johnson and onto a private development parcel, and then crosses again over Kearney and onto another private development parcel. At this point, it's about 13 feet above grade, or 30 feet above grade, and meets the Broadway Y. As you can imagine, having a piece of infrastructure that is both at an elevated level and as well as crossing public parks, public rights of way, and private development parcels adds a significant level of complexity to the funding and construction considerations for that to occur. So this was, I will mention this again as we move into the development agreement term sheets. Next slide. Through our conversations with our Bureau partners and with Design Commission, our refined master plan that we're presenting tomorrow has further information around how to break up the massing of the buildings, particularly at the northern end of the site where most of the most dense development is allowed to occur. It recognizes the significant terminus of the North Park blocks as it moves into that elevated Green Loop pathway, and then speaks to how those buildings should respond to the adjacent plazas and the Green Loop. Next slide. It also speaks to our desires and strategies to ensure open space and ground floor activation. So the master plan calls for above grade parking due to environmental and water table conditions on the site, but is mindful of where that parking should not occur, particularly around the open space and kind of main street right of way, if you will, through the center of the site to ensure desired activation. It speaks to how we can achieve the character and activation of other private or other alleyways to the site, and recognizes that while it sets out the framework for the open space and Green Loop, further design refinement is needed with our city and development partners as we move forward. So acknowledging that will be yet a second phase of design work that will come before the Design Commission. Next slide, please. And then finally, it looks at, we had an analysis of the traffic impacts that would occur due to this development and how those can be mitigated through a combination of capacity improvements, whether that's new signals and streets through the site, multimodal bike and pedestrian pathways, and then finally a transportation demand management plan. Most of the traffic impacts we could mitigate through physical improvements, But when you imagine the intersection where the Broadway and Lovejoy bridge ramps meet, that is an elevated structure that really limits any physical improvements to address that impact. It is already a failing intersection today, but certainly this development will impact that. And so we elected to pursue a transportation demand management plan to further address those impacts and encourage, or I should say discourage, the use of single occupancy vehicle travel. Next slide. Before I leave it, I don't know if there are any clarifications or questions on the master plan. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Roger to speak to the community benefits agreement. Roger?
All right. Chair Cruz, commissioners, for the record, again, my name is Roger Gonzalez. I'm with the Equity Governance and Communications Department at Prosper Portland. I'm going to talk to you about the community benefits agreement and the work that we've done and what we've achieved at this point after a year of negotiations. I think it's also important to note that while there are many individuals at the agency that have in some ways touched this work and touched the work of Broadway Corridor, I want to immediately thank, of course, the team. And the team is comprised of Kimberly Branham, Lisa Aguaf, Myra Areola, Allison Keene, John Wasserman, and Hope Whitney. There is one particular individual who I think also deserves a special shout out, and that is Sarah Harpole. It has been a wonderful experience to enter a new agency, to take on this work, and to have her as someone to, as a teammate, as a colleague. And it has been just amazing to see all the work that she takes on and has been able to manage and accomplish. And of course, also want to thank our consultant, Cecilia Estelano, and her expertise and guidance. So with that, we can roll to the next slide. As my favorite educator, teacher would say, it's best to start at the beginning. So here we go. From 1964 to 2019, Broadway Corridor was the home of the main USPS postal service processing facility for all of Oregon and southwestern Washington. But again, if we really are talking about the beginning, we have to talk about Broadway Corridor and the adjacent blocks as a place that existed far before then, before we've considered it what it is now. And its longer history as a center of commerce and a landing port for New Portlanders and the First Peoples. And so this would include a Chinookan Center of Commerce and home to Wapato Valley people. It would also include Chinese American rail workers and a train station, once envisioned to be the largest rail terminal in the nation. Is also the site of the first performance of jazz in the city at the Golden West Hotel. And of course, a thriving Japantown before Japanese American residents were forced into internment camps during World War II. So when you see the CBA term sheet, the agreement itself, which is to come, the work that we've accomplished here, and when we talk about the workers and the communities and the businesses that we want to uplift through this work, the focal point is really around our Indigenous communities, our Black community, Japanese and Chinese American communities. And so I just want to be sure that we make that statement up front. So next slide, please. And while we have been negotiating for a year, they began, as I mentioned a year ago, our tri-party negotiations between Prosper, Continuum, and the Healthy Communities Coalition. Continuum partners advised and participated in this process, but are not signatories. The obligations itself and the terms of the CBA will be attached and flow through the DDA itself, which Sarah will cover. And I just want to also note that I very much appreciate their partnership and their commitment, their expertise. I'm excited to see what we can do and what we will accomplish here. In particular, the team, Mark Falcone, Mike Anderson, and Frank Cannon, who, again, I'm looking very much forward to their continued partnership and appreciate the time that they put in. Now, a little bit about HCC from as they have shared on their website. HCC was formed in 2015 to create a new broad-based force for ensuring development in Portland development in Portland is built on a foundation of racial equity and delivers good jobs, quality, affordable housing, and opportunities to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and working class communities. They are a coalition of more than 20 organizations representing many of Portland's communities of color, environmental and environmental justice communities, small businesses, transportation justice advocates, people with disabilities, and organized workers. Many organizations in the coalition have been engaged in this process, and we have some listed here. I want to particularly thank the negotiating committee on their side, some of whom you will hear from today, and especially want to thank Vivian Satterfield, who unfortunately cannot be here today. Their hard work and dedication, their persistence on this cannot be understated, and it has been a true pleasure to do this work with them, and I again look forward to seeing what we can accomplish together. We have a long time ahead of us, and I'm very eager to see this work completed. So with that, I will do a very high level overview of a year's worth of work and negotiations and what we have secured via the community benefits term sheet. So next slide, please. The community benefits agreement conversation in this region has really primarily been around construction equity and around project labor agreements. And as HCC has reminded us before, and I will state here, that it is the first chapter. And so when we talk about the community benefits agreement for the Broadway corridor, we're talking about a global community benefits agreement that covers many different areas and not just construction equity. But it is an important piece. And so let us begin there. What we have agreed to is the application of the city CBA policy to the city's investment on the infrastructure and the demolition of the USPS PNDC facility. We have committed a $4.2 million funding investment for workforce development and business technical assistance. We are requiring Continuum and developers to direct their general contractors to, in good faith, negotiate a project labor agreement. And I think it's important to note that within that, there are a few areas that we'd like to see that we are specifically calling out within the project labor agreement, things that should be included or that must be included. And there's, of course, a very robust sort of, I almost hesitate to call it a baseline because it's a very strong baseline regardless of whether there is a project labor agreement. One of those, and a key point that was negotiated, was the use of what's known as a responsible contractor on the site. So among many different provisions that a contractor would need to fulfill or meet is the provision of full family healthcare, and that is specifically around contracts in aggregate annually of $1 million or more. That threshold specifically exempts COVID certified firms. So if they do not reach that $1 million threshold in their COVID certified firm, they would not need to meet that requirement specifically. Regardless of what BOLI a BOLI determination is made, Continuum has opted into prevailing wage on core and shell, as well as tenant improvements of a certain size. We see here the COVID certified firm utilization at 22%, with a further breakdown of 12% and 5% for minority or disadvantaged owned businesses and women or disadvantaged owned businesses, respectively. Prosper has maintained their workforce diversity program goals of 30% minority and 50% women overall, disaggregated by trade and apprentice, with further augmented goals that I believe are in line with these city CBA. And on the operations equity, there is a funding set aside made up of 0.4% of the labor costs associated with provision of janitorial and security work. And that would go towards workforce development, compliance monitoring, and enforcement. And that is specifically to be used for those workers, and that is to elevate those workers. There is, separate from this agreement, a direct agreement between Continuum and SEIU regarding the use of a separate and different responsible contractor designation for janitorial and security workers. And what that does really is establish a baseline of benefits, wages, sort of security for the janitorial and security workers in the buildings on that site. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, that the signatories to the CBA, I should mention, will include PHB as they are part owner and have specific obligations within the CBA. For the affordable housing, however, specifically on private development for inclusionary housing, the option is the on-site option of 10% of units at 60% AMI. PHB has committed to intentional tenanting and outreach to Black, Indigenous, Japanese, and Chinese American communities. And there is a specific call out of prioritization of ADA accessible units and ADA accessibility. On our business equity section, we committed $3 million toward affordable commercial tenanting, and in part to support the prioritization for BIPOC and persons with disability-owned businesses. And again, reasonably priced goods and services, this idea that you can get a cup of coffee on the Broadway corridor side for $1, and making sure that anyone feels that this is a space that is for them, that they can visit, they can live in, and they can play in. And something that is very exciting is the exploration of community ownership models. And so very much looking forward to how we are able to achieve that. On tenanting, marketing and recruitment in line with guiding principles, and of course, encouraging involvement with Portland Means Progress to hire and contract with BIPOC and women workers, as well as those owned businesses. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. And sustainability, establishing a goal of carbon neutrality and a good faith agreement to use 100% renewable energy. The oversight, another key feature of this agreement is that, or in the term sheet, is that we would establish an oversight committee that's comprised of HCC representatives, developers, neighborhood representation, BIPOC business owner, a sustainability expert, and of course, Prosper staff. That oversight committee would ensure compliance with the CBA and advise Prosper on remedies. It is advisory and acts as a problem-solving body and may make recommendations on actions needed. The Oversight Committee itself would provide an annual report to the Prosper Portland Board of Commissioners and Portland City Council, and would have its own sort of operating budget of $50,000 per year for 10 years. Some of the conversation around that has really been, under the purview of overseeing the implementation of the CBA, that they might use that for stipends for community members, that they might use that to bring in expertise. HCC is also noted and is in the CBA term sheet around the creation of a cohort of community members to build their capacity around community benefits agreements. And this is certainly an area that we think could be used for that. So with that, that is an incredibly high level overview of the year's worth of work, and happy to pause here and take any questions.
I have a quick question. So you mentioned a good faith effort to negotiate the project labor agreement. What happens if that effort fails? What's the fallback to that?
That's a great question. So there are a number of sort of areas, such as, for example, Prosper's business equity and workforce training and hiring programs, those policies that are around certified firm utilization, that are around workforce diversity goals, things like that would stay regardless of what the project labor agreement itself sort of brings to bear in terms of how and who gets to work on the site itself. And I also want to pull this up to see if I have more areas that are actually within that would sort of be the default. Of course, the responsible contractor designation itself, which has a number of different requirements, is a default within that. So that remains regardless of whether the project labor agreement is committed. The funding, the $4.2 million, $4 million of that is on the private or the vertical construction. And so that would remain. So those are, I think, 3 areas that I can think of right now off the top of my head that would be maintained in, with or without the presence of a project labor agreement.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
I have a question. So Roger, you brought up the $1 million threshold for family health care in aggregate. Is that just for MWESB contractors? Is that across the board? I thought originally I heard that it was just for the MWESB contractors.
That is right. That is for certified firms specifically. So if you're a certified firm and you're under $1 million threshold, yes, then you are exempt from that provision until you hit above $1 million in the calendar year on that development side, in which case that requirement will kick in. And thank you, Mark, for noting that the prevailing wage continuums, opting in of the prevailing wage, that would, on the corn shell, would maintain in the absence of a project labor agreement as well.
Can you further clarify that? So you're saying it's $1 million on the project site?
Yeah. So, for example, if you're on any of the parcels and you have $900,000 worth of contracts in your certified firm, then you would not need to meet that specific requirement of the responsible contractor designation. But let's say you're on, within the year and you hit that $1 million or $1 million and one in receiving contracts because you worked on one project, and then within the year you move to say there's another building that's being built, and you are able to get that contract. It's the combined contract amount. So if you are firm A and you have $100,000 here within the year, and then within the same year you hit $900,000 and you cross that threshold, then that would kick in. I hope that makes sense. Actually, now I'm thinking about how I've
move on to the next chapter. I'm going to similarly walk through a high-level summary of the development agreement term sheet and associated understandings and investment strategy to support that. Next slide, please. This captures the combination of public and private investment needed to deliver on the development, collectively to deliver on the development we aspire to on the post office property. The community benefits that Roger just walked through, we estimate have a financial value or investment requirement of about $40 million of both public and private contribution to deliver on those. We also estimate that the streets and open space and utilities to support that development require an investment of about $82 million of public and private funds. And then our private development partners will need to bring to bear about $1 billion of investment. That includes Continuum, the affordable housing developers, and then the developers of two parcels that are not contemplated by the development agreement with Continuum. And then, of course, Prosper Portland and PHB acquired the site for approximately $88 million. And then Prosper has additional site preparation activities that we are undertaking. Next slide, please. PHB invested $14.5 million to acquire the site. This ensures that we can helps ensure that we can deliver on our delivery of 720 affordable housing units on the development. We have identified block 4, which is shown here with the star, as being the development parcels that PHB will undertake directly. So they will have ownership of this parcel and seek their own development partners to deliver on units there. Additional units will be delivered via the city's inclusionary housing policy, because we don't yet know the program mix of the private development parcels. We don't know how many units will be delivered via that inclusionary housing requirement. And so in our agreement with PHB, we also have included the Broadway Bridge site and the Block R parcel also highlighted here as kind of release valves, if you will, if additional development area or opportunities is required to meet that 720 affordable housing unit goal. We also collectively were very mindful of where those parcels are located. And so as you see, parcel 4 really I think of as at the center of the site, at the heart of the commercial Main Street and the open area access to ensure equitable access to those amenities. Next slide, please. And then shifting to our development agreement with Continuum Partners, I'm going to kind of walk through 3 or 4 kind of thematic chapters within that development agreement. The first is really how the terms of the land transactions themselves. So the development agreement contemplates the parcel shown outlined in yellow, with the remaining parcel 1 and parcel 3 available for additional development opportunities or development partnerships. The addition of parcel 5 was fairly recent within our negotiations. As you know, Prosper has been mindful of having other opportunities for local and minority-owned development partnerships. And so in exchange for that inclusion of that additional parcel, we also secured Continuum's commitment to partner with a minority-owned firm on one or more of their developments shown here. The development agreement calls for this acquisition to occur over 3 phases, with due diligence to occur with each phase. The final lot is currently called for to occur within 10 years of the first phase closing, which we think will occur in spring of 2024. That closing is dependent on the timing of when the first infrastructure is completed to support that development. So if you imagine from the diagram here, Johnson and Kearney are required to go through the site and the associated utilities to the full extent of those rights of way. There are also requirements for off-site utility improvements, specifically water and sewer and sanitary improvements in 9th Avenue to serve the district. And then there are some off-site traffic signal mitigation improvements that are needed. So that infrastructure must be completed before that first phase starts. The development agreement also allows for a few different scenarios in which certain deadlines can be told or pushed out. Continuum has at their discretion 1 year of tolling that they can pursue, and then at no expense, and then a second year of tolling that they can pursue if they pay 2.5% of the purchase price of any outstanding lots at that time to buy them that additional 1 year time frame. There are also certain scenarios in which deadlines could be pushed out tied to performance obligations or the satisfactory completion of the open space design. So there are a number of different scenarios contemplated within the phasing in the agreement. The purchase price of the parcels will be agreed to in the final DDA, and it will be based on joint appraisal instructions that we will be issuing for our own separate appraisals. And then there's a process called out in the term sheet by which we will review and reconcile and adjust a final purchase price based on considerations such as environmental remediation that needs to occur on the site. Continuum will also make 2 earnest money payments tied to that first phase of development. So the first is $500,000 when the city has 60% engineering plans completed for that phase 1 infrastructure that I just described, and then an additional $1 million escrow payment when the city commences construction on those improvements. And then, as you know, we are currently pursuing demolition and environmental remediation activities. We will also have additional cost responsibilities for incremental costs tied to that private development. Next slide, please. The DDA also sets out certain performance obligations of the private development. Within the master plan, each parcel has a prescribed minimum gross square foot of development that can occur on that site, as well as a maximum. And so the development agreement calls for incrementally increasing the development density that must occur with each phase, and the ability for them to kind of credit density over that requirement to future phases, and the ability to move that density around within the development site. As I mentioned, inclusionary housing will be required for any residential development, and we have prescribed that it will be compliant with the option of 10% of the units being at 60% of area median income, and then it will be on-site and in mixed-use development. Of course, the development agreement also calls for compliance with the master plan and the transportation demand management plan requirements, as well as the community benefits agreement. And it speaks to certain investments specifically noted within the community benefits agreement. Prosper will credit $290,000 to the purchase price per parcel in recognition of offsetting some of the prevailing wage obligation. And then we are also responsible for $1 million of the $2.4 million of the construction equity fund that is specific to these parcels here. So that total fund is the $4 million that Roger had referenced earlier. And then Roger had also noted that Continuum will be opting into prevailing wage, and so we will be seeking a BOLI determination consistent with that, that opting in. And then finally, there are certain temporary restrictive covenants that could be placed on the non-Continuum parcels. So specifically, if Continuum elects to build a hotel, and there'll be a covenant that there will be no competing hotel development until the earlier of their acquisition of phase 3 or 2033. And if they develop office over 50,000 square feet, there will be a 2-year covenant for no additional office space on the non-Continuum parcels. And I'm going to apologize, I have a train coming, so you will hear that momentarily. Next slide, please. And finally, it speaks to obligations tied to the timing and sequencing of the phases of development. Specific to phase one, of course, we must complete the master plan in order for any development to occur. The city must also complete the phase one infrastructure I noted to support that development. And then if the city elects to undertake the open space design that I mentioned, and if Continuum elects to acquire parcels in phase one that is implicated by that design, then that work, of course, will need to be completed so that we have an understanding of how that development needs to be responsive to that design. And then finally, Continuum has an obligation to demonstrate that they have sufficient financing and permitting to be able to commence construction shortly thereafter that closing. The requirements for phase 2 and 3 are very similar, with a note that open space design must be completed. They also must show satisfactory compliance with the community benefits agreement, the master plan, and the other commitments of those prior phases to continue in their acquisition and similarly have financing and permits in hand. The schedule shown here, very small. You can see that this is a phase 1 infrastructure schedule. So you can see at the top are site preparation activities. Notably, the demolition of the main building is required before any infrastructure can be built. The blue diamond indicates when we currently estimate, so it's June of 2022, when the Bureau of Transportation, excuse me, will let the construction contracts for that those phase 1 rights of way, Johnson and Kearney. 24 months from that date, Continuum is obligated to close. So we currently estimate that will be June of 2024. And then shown at the bottom with the green diamond is when the city Parks Bureau currently contemplates starting that open space design. So should those impacted parcels be in phase 1, should the city elect to continue to maintain this time frame, that's when we currently estimate that work will occur. Next slide, please. And as you know, we have an obligation to relocate and retain the post office retail functions within the property, and so that work is underway. Next slide, please. That will be moving it to the ground floor of the adjacent parking structure, which allows the demolition of the main building and then that phase 1 infrastructure to go through, notably Johnson and Kearney, that supports the development of the majority of the parcels under the development agreement with Continuum. Next slide. As over the course of their development, then they have an obligation to relocate that post office retail function to parcel 9C. We have an obligation to pay the hard and soft costs associated directly with that space and the post office has a requirement that they will own that space. So that will be a condominium that is created for their ownership. Next slide, please. However, within the development agreement, we also have language that speaks to once that relocation occurs, that can allow the garage to come down, the park to be completed, Park Avenue to be constructed, and the remaining green loop infrastructure to be completed. However, this will not occur prior to the earlier of either 2030 or when Continuum has acquired at least 4 lots. And this is to assure we have a balance of development and public investment occurring on the site, and notes that we will be incurring expenses associated with that work. Next slide, please. This summarizes the investment strategy that is embedded within the development agreement. And so we are undertaking just under $39 million worth of site preparation activities currently. We sought your authorization for much of that work this past June. That is being funded with River District TIF and an EPA grant. Excuse me. As I noted, we have identified $82 million in infrastructure. Excuse me, that's necessary. That is coming through a combination of our Bureau partners as well as Prosper Investment. Excuse me. That is dependent on our land sales. We are also proposing a local improvement district is necessary to fund the streets, have a value of about $23 million with remaining private development investment necessary to carry that forward. We have an obligation of $11.5 million to deliver on the community benefits agreement. Excuse me. And we estimate that the developer, the private sector, needs to bear about $28.5 million for that investment. Notably, our ability to afford these investments is dependent on the city's agreement to forgive the line of credit that we took out to make resources available for the acquisition of the site. And so that is a significant dependency of both their approval of that as well as our other public investment for this to move forward. Next slide, please. And then finally, with any project of this scale and complexity, it is not without risk. And so we wanted to call out a couple key considerations, specifically, as I just mentioned, that this strategy is dependent on that line of credit forgiveness, as well as that other public investment that we have contemplated. We have made assumptions around land value, and given our current economic circumstances, there may be risk to that land value, the timing of those acquisitions, and the cost estimates that we have assumed are necessary to deliver on the infrastructure and those environmental obligations. This impacts our ability to perform on the infrastructure work, our community benefits obligations, meeting our financial sustainability goals, and could result in increased holding costs. Also significantly, these agreements are complex and long-term, and so they will require careful monitoring and attention over many years and maintaining institutional knowledge and understanding of these agreements. However, we have sought to mitigate risks where possible, specifically having enforceable remedies to spur timely closing and development, and then having reopener clauses should financial circumstances make it infeasible for us to meet our obligations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then finally, we were before you in June for authorization of this work, so I wanted to give you a quick update that the USPS retail relocation work is underway, and then the vehicle maintenance facility demolition is also underway. They are almost done with the demolition phase of that project, and we'll be shifting into the soils remediation work. We are providing updates on our project website at Broadway Corridor PDX, and we are actively pursuing either time-lapse or drones footage so we can also kind of keep visual updates on that work as it progresses. Next slide, please. One more. So then just in conclusion, I think recognizing the long scale nature of this work, and so while this is a very significant milestone before you today, in some ways we joke that it really means the work can truly begin. So again, just to briefly recap, we are taking the master plan to design commission tomorrow, and then taking the collection of agreements and investment strategy to City Council in September. The site preparation work and infrastructure work is already underway and will continue through late 2023. If the line of credit is not forgiven, that payment of $35 million, it comes due June of 2022. And so we would need to seek refinancing or alternate means of repaying that obligation. And then finally, we think that the first phase of acquisition will close mid-2024, in which Continuum will initiate their design and development process. Next slide, please. I believe that is the conclusion of our remarks. And so if you have other questions, and I'm sure we have public testimony and comments as well.
Why don't we go ahead and have our testimony, our invited testimony, and then we'll go back to Sarah and Roger for additional questions after that, if we want to. Okay. So we have several people. I will read them off. Molly Rogers with Portland Housing Bureau, Mark Falcone with Continuum Partners, Kelly Haynes with Metropolitan Alliance for Workforce Equity, Nate Stokes with Columbia Pacific Building and Construction Trades Council and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Jay Richmond with Oregon Tradeswomen, and Michael Birch. I don't know if he's with us or not. He's unconfirmed, but he's with the Pacific Northwest Regional Council of Carbon, MAWE. So I don't know if you folks have discussed who wants to go first or how we want to handle this, but I would just welcome all of you. And if anybody would like to start off, that would be great. And we'll just kind of move through and have testimony from whoever would like to start.
If possible, it'd be great if I could go first. I've got a kid pickup pretty soon from camp. But good afternoon, commissioners. I am Molly Rogers. I'm the Deputy Director of the Portland Housing Bureau. As a co-owner of the United States Post Office site, we are pleased to be here with our sister bureaus, Healthy Communities Coalition and Continuum, as we take the next step to making Broadway Corridor vision a reality. Embodies in these agreements that that you hopefully will approve today are our commitments to ensure that Broadway Corridor will become a bright, vibrant new neighborhood with housing for families at all income levels. To that end, the Portland Housing Bureau, with community developers and Continuum through inclusionary housing, will bring 720 new affordable housing units to the Broadway Corridor project, starting with a master plan phase 1 development on parcel 4. We at the Housing Bureau are committed to ensuring economic opportunities through the developments we fund. And we respect the historic roots of Indigenous, Black, Japanese American, and Chinese American communities that have resided in the area. We'll be working with the community to ensure that our developments provide meaningful economic opportunity through our DMW ESB goals and requiring affirmative marketing and outreach plans to those communities with roots in the area. So we look forward to continuing our work on Broadway Corridor, and we'd like to thank the team and the leadership at Prosper Portland for their tireless commitment over these last 5+ years, I think Sarah mentioned, to our community and to affordable housing and to equity. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Mark Falcone, would you like to go next on behalf of Continuum?
Sure. Thank you very much. Hello, commissioners. Good afternoon. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today. Sarah and Roger, what a remarkable job you just did of summarizing so succinctly 2+ years of work that we've been involved in, much less the work that happened before we got involved. So thank you for that. And it's honestly remarkable to sort of revisit all of the remarkable work that so many people have done over the last really 3+ years, I'm sure, when you really factor in all of the pre-work that Prosper did leading up to this moment. Obviously, I would like to thank everybody that was involved. Sarah did a really wonderful job of calling everybody out, but Kimberly and the entire Prosper team, the competence and professionalism with which you have managed this and the calmness and the sort of, persistent sort of momentum that you have given this has really been remarkable. The steering committee, put in countless hours, and people from all walks of life who had to surrender time for this. And there were moments where I'm sure it was frustrating, but I think back to those steering committee meetings and am incredibly grateful that so many people were willing to invest their time and energy. The HCC and the negotiating team in particular, because of COVID, we have now been into people's homes. We have met their children, through the video chats, and it's really been a really remarkable process. Frankly, the fact that we, that this thing almost didn't kind of get there probably is evidence that we all really worked hard to extend ourselves to realize, a fair and appropriate resolution. I would like to thank the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty, who really stepped in at a very key moment and really helped to get that element of the project over the hump. And I think, there's so many people that have been remarkable contributors here, but I do think Sarah and Roger deserve a specific call out. And I really want to thank Cecilia, who very skillfully guided us through, both the steering committee process, but then the CBA negotiation. The finalization of the DDA and the CBA term sheet is an incredibly meaningful achievement. We've got a lot of work to go. We all understand that. We all know that. But this is an incredibly important milestone, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here to mark this moment with everyone. The development of this site and the Johnson Street, this is a complex project without, candidly, if this had been just simply a private development, this would be a very, very complex project. But with all of the additional expectations that have been attached to this project, it's been, I would say it's as complex a project as I can imagine being involved in. And we've been involved in some very, very interesting, large-scale public-private projects. So I do think we all deserve to acknowledge that, we're setting the table here for something that I think really will help us all understand new ways that we can create a better balance of prosperity through the kinds of work that we do in these important urban places going forward. I would say that, we were drawn to this project, frankly, because of that challenge, and the very earnest and creative opportunity that Prosper has, I think, provided for us to think together with a broad segment of your community about how to approach these projects to create, a more fair and a more balanced sort of path forward. I think that we share the belief on the part of everybody here that the bedrock of our communities is got to be built on wage equity and housing security. There is no way for our communities that, to be able to continue to prosper and to create economic opportunity for people like ourselves if that isn't in place. And we struggled and we wrestled about the right pathways to get there. At times, I think, throughout this, what connected us and kept us together is that shared value and that shared belief. And I would say that as this project advances closer, to the vertical development, we're really, really excited to engage more thoroughly and more deeply with small and disadvantaged business partners on a range of wealth creating strategies, and particularly the communities that were deprived from economic opportunity here because of coercive displacement. So I think as exciting as this agreement is, I think there is a tremendous amount of opportunity still embedded in the vertical development as we move this forward. And I'm just thrilled to be able to be here with you over what is likely to be a decade or more. So thank you.
Thank you, and we greatly appreciate your hard work on this as well and your partnership. It's much appreciated. So we have several members of the HCC. I don't know how you want to proceed with your comments, but anybody would like to volunteer? Kelly Haynes is next on my list, but would you like to start?
Sure, I can start. Thank you, Chair, and the whole commission and Director Branham for inviting us today to speak. I don't have a whole lot to say, but I do want to just acknowledge the work of Vivian Satterfield, who was unable to join us today. She really has demonstrated a ton of leadership in helping to navigate this process with the coalition and working in partnership with the Metropolitan Alliance for Workforce Equity on this project. I also want to acknowledge Cecilia, who is the sort of helping facilitate this work on behalf of Prosper. So I don't know if she's on the call, but I just want to say that was also really helpful to have her involvement in helping all of us get to resolution. And everyone involved in the negotiating, so Mark, Frank, and everyone at Continuum being involved in this and showing up in good faith over the last year to just try to work together to find a path forward. So thank you all. I just want to say that from the perspective of HCC and this work, we really do see this as an important step for a different way of doing development in Portland. To have real community benefits outlined and guaranteed in a private development that was mutually negotiated with both community and labor at the table, I think is pretty historic. And we see that as a first step for things to come and how we can do economic development in our region. And this development is not only utilizing the proven tool of the city's community benefits agreement on all infrastructure investments, but it's also going above and beyond that on the private development through historic language that guarantees the utilization of responsible contractors. And to us, that means that will lead to stable careers for local BIPOC communities and an even playing field for high road minority contractors. And so I think, from our perspective, I just want to name those as just really important and noteworthy community benefits. And we're here and ready to work with you to implement now, and we're committed to the success of this. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. I believe that Jay Richmond wanted to speak next. Correct?
Hi, everybody. I'm going to kind of be repeating a lot of what Kelly Haynes just said. Anyway, hello, commissioners. Good afternoon. I am Jay Richmond, the Workforce Equity Manager for Oregon Tradesmen and a member of HCC in Maui. I just want to thank the efforts of Prosper, the City of Portland, and Continuum for working with our coalition and putting together an agreement that will cover the first private development project of its kind in the city of Portland as a way to advance racial justice for BIPOC communities. This project will bring 720 units of affordable housing, family wage jobs, and small business opportunities, as well as construction hiring goals that will have a great positive impact for BIPOC communities. That said, we all know that this work has just begun, and that as we move past this fourth step, we look forward to making sure that these goals are met through the ongoing oversight of the DCCOC.
Great, thank you. Next, would Mr. Stokes like to speak?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner and commissioners and everybody involved here. The nice thing about going last in this group of HCC is I can just say ditto and move on, and make it short and sweet. The one thing I'd like to say is it has been a long process. I was involved with the steering committee all the way through as the negotiations. And the one thing that I find on this with building any kind of building or bridge or anything is a strong foundation. And I feel like going through what we've just went through, we have a strong foundation to start building a bigger future and the way we do things in Portland. So I want to thank everybody for the time that they've put in to get to where we're at. And I look forward to moving further through the process and moving forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I understand that Mr. Birch may be on the call now. If so, would you like to go next?
I can offer that he is multitasking because he's in an all-day training. So I've been texting with him, and he doesn't think he's going to be able to be that successful with Zoom multitasking to actually speak. But he is glad to be at least listening in. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, if there's nobody else then I would return back to the commissioners and ask if they have any comments that they would like to make or questions that they would like to ask of staff or any of our guests.
I'd like to jump in here. I would like to thank Kimberly and the entire staff, Sarah, for this long road that took us to where we are today, and some exciting changes, and as well as the community that participated in the steering committee all the way through to negotiations. Kelly, Nate, Jay, really appreciate everything you guys put into this, and thank you Continuum for being a good partner on this development, and I look forward to seeing what we can build.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. Anyone else?
I do have a question that's maybe directed towards Sarah, just about the appraisal process. I think it's such an important piece of the financial strategy here. And if I understand correctly, the appraisals for phase one are going to happen now, as soon as this is approved, so over the next few months. And I'm wondering, we're obviously in a crazy time right now, presumably a moment in time over the course of what's such a long span here that we've been through, and the future to actually execute this project. So I'm wondering, the appraisal guidelines don't really talk at all about COVID and whether that's going to impact values in any way. Wondering if there's been any discussions on that front and any discussions with appraisers to see how they're dealing with appraisals at this point in time.
Yes, so the appraisal instructions call for actually all of the parcels to be appraised prior to the development agreement being executed. And then there is a CPI index by which that value can incrementally increase over time. And then, and Allison, jump in if I get this incorrectly, but I believe if acquisition occurs after 5 years of that appraisal date, then there is an ability to reappraise those parcels and take either a percentage of that increase or that CPI, that initial CPI increase to readjust to those acquisition prices. Specific to your question regarding COVID, we have discussed with local appraisers kind of how they might think about that. And I think everyone has collectively acknowledged that it is something that may be a factor, but is challenging to really quantify. So I don't know if others who were involved in that conversation, that sounded like it was something that they would need to grapple with through that appraisal process.
And I will only add, excuse me, this is Allison Keene, commissioners, that just a point of clarification that the way our term sheet runs is if the closing date is 5 years or more subject to tolling after the appraisal, then a reappraisal process will happen and the parties would split the difference between the increase. Just want to clarify that point. We also have joint appraisal instructions that we have discussed with an appraiser, and we have both negotiated together that we will each be submitting the same appraisal instructions to our respective appraisers. And then there's the agreement by which we make those match, or we determine a purchase price based on those appraisals, possibly with a third appraisal.
And the appraisal's taking place now. Sorry, are they taking place then now after, if we approve it today, then they, in the next 90 days, is that correct?
Yes.
Commissioner, I did want to mention, maybe Allison or Sarah can talk, but we did talk to an appraiser just about sort of what they're seeing and how they are looking into it. I don't know if there's anything that we can share, but we did have a conversation recently with an appraiser to understand how they're accounting for the market uncertainty and what kind of considerations might be included. Sarah, Allison, anything you want to add there?
I think just, again, his recognition that it's something they would need to grapple with, but really appraisals will be looking at comparables from other recent sales too. And so to the extent they are seeing transactions that are occurring that are being impacted by COVID, then that will be factored into their appraisal process.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions?
Just a quick comment. I think it's exciting to be part of this project because it will certainly outlive any of our tenure on the commission. So being part of setting a foundation for what is going to be a signature development for the city, obviously for the agency as well, is it's fun. I'll say, I know it's been a lot of hard work on the part of the entire team, and we're, as commissioners, just along for the ride in some ways. But it's been really good to observe the process taking form as it has over the last several years. And yeah, and it's also nice to have a partner like Continuum, who I've seen the work that they've done in Denver with Union Station there and walked around that area quite a bit. And it's fun to imagine something like that coming to our city as well. So I appreciate everyone's hard work to make sure that it's done, again, in an extremely equitable fashion. And we'll continue to push for those equity-related goals. So thanks again.
I'd also just note, we would be remiss to also not thank Commissioner Myers for his dedication to this project as well. I mean, we've talked about the long-term nature of this work, and he has also someone who's been with us through the beginning, since the beginning, through all of the steering committee meetings as well. So thank you for your investment too.
I did want to make one note in answer to Commissioner Gambetti's question about appraisals, and it was noted by Ms. Alexander in the comments. She's the attorney for Continuum, that our appraisal instructions do instruct the appraisers to value the properties as though they are fully loaded with the infrastructure that will be there, since that is a condition precedent to closing phase one.
Thank you. Commissioner Stoudemire-Wesley, did you have any comments? And if not, that's fine, but just want to make sure I got you.
No, not at this time.
Great, thank you. All right, then, well, I'll go last and just say that I'll second the gratitude that everybody's already passed along. I just want to thank everyone for their hard work dedication, goodwill, good intentions, and I think, as Mr. Falcone noted, the fact that it was a tough go and people felt a little bit tense about it all around probably meant that we got to a good spot in the end for everybody, and that everybody contributed and stretched as far as they could. So I just want to thank everyone for their extremely hard work and investment in all of this. And I think, over the decades, we'll all look back on this, and this will just be a tremendous thing for our city. So, so thanks to all of you for everything. So if there are no further comments, then I will go ahead and accept a motion to approve resolution number 7390.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you very much. All right, all those in favor then, would you please say aye and raise your hand?
Aye.
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 All right, unanimously approved. Thanks very much to all of you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up, we have item number 14. This is also an action item authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation for the Southwest 4th Avenue project in the North Macadam Tax Increment Finance District. And Eric Jacobson is presenting on this, I believe.
Chair Cruz, apology for interrupting. Both Eric and Thea Munchell will be presenting items 14 and 15 in one presentation.
Okay, I didn't realize that. All right, well then let me read item 15 then as well, which is approving an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation for the Foster Streetscape and Springwater Connector projects in the Lentz Town Center Tax Increment Financing District. So Eric and Thea Munchell are up there. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Cruz and Commissioners. My name is Eric Jacobson. I'm a project manager in the Development and Investment Department.
Hi, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Chair Cruz, Commissioners, and Director Branham. I'm Thea Munchell. I'm also a project manager in the Development and Investment Department and the relationship manager for Gateway and Lentz.
So we're here today to ask you to adopt resolutions 7392, 7393, and 7394. And we're presenting these together because they're all intergovernmental agreements with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, or PBOT, as we'll refer to them throughout this presentation. And they have some commonalities between them, which is why we're presenting them together. Next slide. So the three agreements are one in the North Macadam TIF district for $3 million. And that's the project I'm the project manager for, and I'll talk about in some detail. And then two in Lentz TIF district for the Foster Streetscape and the Springwater Connector IGA. And Thea will cover those. So what these have in common is they're funding transportation infrastructure that supports safety, equity, and sustainability in these neighborhoods. Because of the source of funds, the funds must be committed by October of 2020 and spent on public projects by April 2023. And this is part of a larger and broader funding partnership with PBOT. And as mentioned in the board reports, there's been an agreement for PBOT to provide $5 million worth of funding towards transportation infrastructure in the post office blocks. Next slide, please. In terms of our strategic alignment, these three projects support three of our initiatives. The first is jobs in terms of construction jobs. Second is neighborhoods, is providing improved transportation facilities and connectivity and transit service in these two neighborhoods. And the third is this partnership we have with PBOT to help each other provide the needed facilities and infrastructure in our neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about the Southwest 4th Avenue project. This is the IGA funding $3 million. And I think on our call, we also have Gabe Graff, who is the PBOT project manager. In case there are any detailed questions you have about the project, he'll be able to answer those. But in terms of where the project's located, it's at the south end of it starts at the south end of downtown at Southwest Carruthers Avenue and runs up to West Burnside Street. And that's shown in the red line on Southwest 4th Avenue in this map. And then highlighted in blue at the southern end of this is the portion of this project that's located in the North Macadam TIF district. And that's the portion that Prosper Portland is contributing towards. The project includes new signalized crossings, transit priority, protected bike lanes. You can see there in the diagram on the left-hand side, and reconstructing and repaving the roadway. And next slide, please. Yes, so the total project budget is about $17 million. And of that, on the third line from the bottom is the subtotal for the portion of the project that's within the North Macadam TIF district. So it's about $5.7 million of the project costs are within that area. And Prosper Portland is contributing $3 million towards that amount. And you can see there, this is a combination of partner funding sources, including TriMet and PBOT funds. In terms of the project schedule, PBOT is anticipating proceeding with design beginning third quarter of 2020 and completing the design work in third quarter 2021, and beginning construction in first quarter 2022 and completing the construction in first quarter 2023. Next slide. So this is a project that has been the result of work that PBOT's been doing for a number of years to support the Central City Comprehensive Plan update, where they looked at what kind of transportation facilities and services were needed to support that comprehensive plan update. And it resulted in the Central City in Motion plan. This was begun in 2017. And there was a 2-year effort to identify what kind of projects were highest priority that should be included in the plan. And there was 2 years of public engagement to arrive at that. That resulted in the adoption of that plan by the Portland City Council in 2018. And since then, PBOT has established an ongoing working group that meets quarterly to oversee implementation of these projects, of which the Southwest 4th Avenue is one of the 18 projects included in this plan. And we provided an update to the Southwest Portland Neighborhood Association specifically on the use of these $3 million worth of funds for this project. And the comment we got back from 2 of the stakeholders was for the stakeholders to reemphasize that their priority within this area and with the use of TIF funds is for to seek an enhanced greenway associated with the development of the Alamo Manhattan property. And as mentioned in the board report, we are engaging in conversations with the Portland Parks and Recreation and the Alamo Manhattan development team to talk about that. But at this time, there's been no agreement reached on whether or not Prosper Portland will provide any money towards a development agreement that will result in an enhanced greenway. But I guess I just want to say that we acknowledge receipt of the comment and are continuing those conversations. And next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Thea to talk about the 2 Lens projects.
Great, thank you, Eric. So one of the projects before us today in Lens is the Foster Streetscape Project. This is a project that has improved the roadway conditions and sidewalk conditions along the Foster corridor connecting Southeast Powell to Southeast 91st. Many of the improvements that have occurred as part of this project include safety improvements such as improved crossings, new street trees, new decorative lighting, new pavement in parts, and new lane striping. The striping has reorganized the street from 4 lanes of traffic to 2 and has added additional bike lanes. The project was completed in the summer of 2019. And as the project also has transformed the Foster Road corridor to better support the community that surrounds it and small scale and local businesses. Next slide. The total project cost associated with this work was approximately $9 million. The PBOT worked to incorporate funding through the Fixing Our Streets and system development charges and additional funding from the federal government. Prosper Portland has contributed approximately $1.6 million to this project in the past through an IGA that was approved through the Board of Commissioners in 2016. Today, we're seeking to increase that funding amount by $650,000, raising that total contribution from the Lentz Town Center TIF to approximately $2.1 million. Next slide. The second project occurring in the Lentz TIF district is the Springwater Connector project. Like the project that Eric presented, this project is occurring both inside and outside of the Lentz TIF district. And you can see the yellow hatched line there is the boundary of the TIF district, and what is the work that is occurring on the eastern side of the project will be within the TIF district. So what we're looking at is new crossing improvements along I believe that's 87th. It's the 80th Greenway neighborhood Greenway connector. So currently the street that will be improved is a unimproved road. So it'll be improved to a paved road with sidewalks and stormwater facilities. It will also improve crossing across Southeast Lavelle. It will include a new crossing onto the Springwater Corridor Trail that will also include safety lighting. There's additional work that's occurring outside of the district as well that will connect the 70s Greenway, neighborhood Greenway, through from Flavelle Street down again to the Springwater Corridor Trail. Next slide. The portion of the project costs that are occurring within the TIF district are approximately $900,000, and $1.2 million of work is occurring outside of the district. Prosper Portland is looking to support this project with $700,000 in the Lentz TIF URA dollars, and PBOT will be contributing an additional $500,000 from Fixing Our Streets and $871,000 through system development charges for a total project cost of $2.1 million. Next slide. These are projects that have been in the planning stages with PBOT for many years. And the Portland Bicycle Plan was created in 2018, and that called for the connection of the neighborhood Greenway streets to the Southwest Corridor Trail. And the Foster Road Streetscape Plan was a community initiated plan that dates back to 2003. PBOT has been the primary agency leading this work, and they have engaged residents and community members and stakeholders for this work over time, including the planning, the design, and the construction of these two projects. Something else to note is the Connector Trail project is something that started construction in July and is looking to complete construction late 2021. Next slide. The equity focus for these projects has largely been in the transportation infrastructure and construction jobs associated with the work. PBOT will be implementing business and workforce policies to complete the contracting and construction of the project. Next slide. And that completes the presentation. If you have questions, Eric and I are available to take questions, and I
Great, thank you very much. Good presentation, and they all look like great projects. Does anyone have any questions they want to raise now? Okay. Justin, do we have any additional testimony on this item?
We don't, Chair Cruz. There had been some emails from constituents related to the North Macadam IGA, and I'd forwarded those to the commissioners, so those should be in your inboxes, but we don't have anybody else signed up to address you as of now.
Okay, great, thank you. I have one question. That is, PBOT looks to be a very active partner in all these projects, and I assume that this financing has been set aside on their end for quite a while, and that COVID and related economic issues won't affect them. Is that correct? In other words, are we comfortable that everybody is on the same page in terms of financing now?
The financing for the projects in Lentz are committed and moving forward. Yes.
And I believe all the PBOT funds are available for the Southwest 4th Avenue project. I think there's an IJ with TriMet that's still pending, but I haven't been notified that there's any uncertainty about the PBOT funds.
Okay, great. It was just a random question. I'm just starting to wonder to what extent budgetary pressures may affect participation in some of these things as we go along. So that's just why I raised the question. So anyway, are there any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, then I would accept a motion. Actually, I think our protocol is we probably need to approve all three motions separately, or excuse me, all three resolutions separately. So would someone like to make a motion to approve resolution number 7392 to start with?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. No further discussion, then all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Passes unanimously. Same for resolution number 7393. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you very much. All right, all those in favor? Aye.
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 Great, thank you. All right, one last one on these matters. Resolution number 7394. Would someone like to make a motion to approve resolution number 7394?
So moved.
Thank you very much. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor, please say aye or give me a wave. All right, thank you very much. Okay, they all three pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience, everyone, with our process, and thanks for your great work on these projects.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have item number 16. This is an action item authorizing an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland Office of Management and Finance to deploy business relief grants with federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act funds, and adopting revised Portland Small Business Guidelines. And Tori Campbell and Shay Flattery-Betton will present. Welcome to Tori and Shay.
Thank you for having us. Good afternoon, commissioners. Good afternoon, Director Branham. We wanted to take this moment to do just a brief reflection of where we were at March of this year. right in the early beginnings of stay-at-home requirements and the impacts that it would have on our city, both collectively as a community, but also the business community. At that time, you will recall one of the actions that we quickly moved in haste to put together and stand up was a small business relief fund. And so we come to you today, 6 months later, really still recognizing that the very necessity is still very much so necessary. And today, the Small Business Relief Fund that we're presenting really is in the very same spirit of its design early on, which is to provide immediate relief and stabilization for businesses that are really wrestling through and navigating this unprecedented pandemic that we are experiencing as globally, obviously as a global people, and respectively as a city. What you hear today really is going to be a similar presentation, but it's really kind of supersized. So this is an expansion of that work. It also is going to be coupled with some of the lessons learned that we are improving upon in our delivery of this program. If you recall, in March, we were able to disperse about $1.4 million to support roughly 235 businesses at that time. And we anticipate as well the need outstripped what we had in terms of resources. But thankfully, I do believe because of the work that was done collectively in a very collaborative manner, we were able to put together a framework that showed its ability to both deliver these dollars and these much needed grant funds quickly, but also deliver them to businesses that were most vulnerable. So that meant we focused in on supporting businesses that had experienced tremendous loss, that were still trying to, at that time, support their employees, either by keeping them on or paying insurance, as well as supporting vulnerable businesses, which for us meant entrepreneurs of color and women in the city. The funds were released and dispersed in a timely manner within less than 12 business days. And we were able to support 90% of the recipients were entrepreneurs of color and women, and also throughout the city geographically, keeping in mind the various needs. And so today we wanted to walk you through what will now be a third round of these funds that we have now received $15 million of CARES funds to disperse. And Shay will walk us through. So if I can just go through my slides, just to kind of give you a tee up of what to be anticipated. The first two, just to again remind us of the purpose of the fund, which again is designed to create relief opportunities for small businesses. Today's action item, again, is just to authorize our intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland, the Office of Management and Finances, to deploy again these relief grants and federal coronavirus relief and economic security act funds or CARES funds. Also, today's actions will be to adopt a revised small business relief fund program guidelines, both from some of the lessons learned that Shay will walk us through in a few moments to continue to improve upon the fund. Before we jump into that, I just wanted to take a quick moment. Oftentimes, this is not provided as an opportunity, but we were able to receive some feedback from recipients of the first tranche of dollars. And I just want to take a moment just so you understand that although the dollar amount doesn't oftentimes seem significant, the timing of which it's been received and the benefactor has been tremendous. So a couple of businesses wrote back. One simply said, "This grant came at a time when I wasn't sure if I could survive this pandemic." Another one wrote, "Thanks for the support. We know it's been very difficult for everyone, and your help is one of the reasons why my business is still open." And another one I thought really struck, and it was a little bit more lengthy, but they said, "Being a recipient of this grant was huge for me. I'm so incredibly grateful to Prosper Portland. The stress I would have felt without money is nearly unfathomable. And someone whose business has shut down for 5 weeks at that time," this was in March when they received this, "who has reduced earnings on both ends of that, and who still hasn't seen a PUA fund come through, this grant ended up being critical to me. I have a deep appreciation for Prosper Portland's decision process with the first round of grants too. So often micro businesses aren't seen as worth investing in, and with the list of grantees which was released, I was thrilled to recognize that fellow micro businesses across the city. Prosper Portland has my back when no one else even understands my business model might exist." So again, we are deeply appreciative of the opportunity to bring this to you today, knowing that the work that is going to go forth and the funds that will be dispensed will continue to have very necessary and real impact on businesses and the communities that they're in. Thank you. At this time, I'm gonna have Shay walk us through what this round of funds will look like, some of the lessons learned and what we'll start with, and then continue just to remind you a bit of an overview of the previous round of funds and where we anticipate going here moving forward. Shay?
Thank you, Tori, and buenas tardes, commissioners and Director Branham. Could I have the next slide, please? So as Tori mentioned, it's important to note that we're really looking at roughly the same process that you all approved in March, but scaled considerably. We're still making most of the grant selections internally and working with disbursement partners to cut checks more rapidly. We're also striving to make sure that we're iterating and making small improvements that really make the difference in ensuring community continues to drive this process. You can see on your screen, these are learnings from our first round, our second round, as well as our collaboration in the SPUR program, which we administer with the Water Bureau. Some of these shifts included not only expanding the application window by 2 weeks to allow for more community members to participate, but applying more detailed demographic questions from OEHR, which include specific fields for tribal affiliation and self-identification. We're using block grants to reach populations and industries that face more barriers to accessing the application. Examples of that being refugee-owned businesses or childcare businesses. And we're also expanding our selection committee that focuses on criteria development and selection with an equity lens. Next slide, please. So even though this project is moving quickly in order to address the very urgent needs of this crisis, we've strived to embed meaningful equity principles and community engagement throughout the process. Some of the groups, so as you can see on the screen, these are some of the groups that we're either currently engaging with or have engaged with in past rounds. Important to note here is specifically the selection committee. And that selection committee has already convened to start informing our decision criteria. That includes members of our Council for Economic and Racial Equity, our community chambers, and our city council offices. I'll just make an important note back on the previous slide. We're also taking some lessons learned from some of our listening sessions. I think a poignant example of that is the listening session we hosted with Black and African American childcare providers. That feedback, along with nearly unanimous feedback from council and our task force, as well as the reality that the childcare industry plays as a key role in our recovery, is making us lean towards providing kind of about a 2 to 3 million internal allocation within the total 15 million of the grant fund. Next slide, please. Next slide, there it is. Okay. So on the screen here, you'll see some of the results from our early rounds of grants. You can note the aggressive application of our equity lens at the time, with over 90% of the funds going to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. I'll show the actual disaggregated data in just a second. And I'll note that we're also currently getting survey responses to inform our 6-month outcomes report, just so we can illustrate how these funds have impacted businesses. The stories that Tori just shared are some of the early responses we've gotten back. Next slide, please. Just some more outcomes from our round, this time on loans. I'll note that this time around, given community feedback, as well as from task force feedback, we're not focusing on loans, knowing that the demand for loans is lower in our community and that grants and immediate relief are really urgently required. So next slide. So this is what I was mentioning, that in order to ensure equitable outcomes, we disaggregate awards by race, ethnicity, geography, and other identities. This pie chart shows awardees by race and ethnicity and demonstrates the diversity of some of our recipients. And as I noted earlier, since our first round, we've actually updated how we collect demographic information, including further disaggregated fields across a lot of these groups, which I mentioned include tribal affiliation and descendancy. Next slide, please. This is a quick chart that shows the geographic distribution from the first round of awards, including meaningful representation in North-Northeast as well as East Portland. Next slide. So now I'd like to move on to our current funding opportunities. This is the 15 million. You'll recall the funding breakdown and scale from our first rounds. It was roughly a little over $1 million in the grants and $1 million in the loan fund. As Tori mentioned, serving almost 300 business owners. For the CARES Act process, this process is scaled considerably. We have, from our proposal considered by council, we have 2 different kind of buckets of funding. One is $12 million run through the similar process that we did with an internal Prosper decision-making process for the grant recipients. This time around, we also have $3 million allocated through block grants, which are similar to the $150,000 that we dispersed early on in the crisis through APANO, where organizations will be able to run smaller selection processes for key communities with an average grant size of $10,000 to allow orgs to make either smaller grants or more targeted grants needed for micro enterprises in those targeted sectors. And you'll notice also that the potential grant round size, the size of the grants this time around can be larger, and that we're trying to expand the total number of businesses reached to at least 1,000 businesses. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we're operating under an aggressive timeline just to try to meet the needs. We're in the middle of 3 different key areas of work currently, which include selecting disbursement partners that can help us cut checks more rapidly, meeting with our selection committee that's informing our criteria and the application design, as well as designing the application itself and translating the application into the 4 most spoken languages in our area other than English. We are hoping the application can open the first week or the second week of September, pending some questions we have on federal reporting guidelines. We noted that the application is going to remain open for at least 2 weeks, and we'll work through selection after that and have our committee approve the final disbursement selection scenarios. And then we're going to have disbursements ideally start the first week of October, getting into the hands of business owners. Next slide, please. So what you see here are some of the baseline criteria that you'll recall from our initial process. These reflect the urgency of the moment we were in back in March, as well as some priorities from our city council. We'll be taking over elements from there, but we've also expanded some of those elements based both on feedback and some of the just the realities of our landscape today, given the COVID crisis. So you'll notice that employee size and how we're defining small businesses remains the same, but we have expanded the eligibility requirement for earned revenue to 5 million. That was what we used on the grants last time. You'll also note, based on feedback, that we are allowing commercial real estate and franchise businesses eligible this time, noting that we're, again, trying to prioritize smaller or BIPOC businesses. Next slide, please. Oh, one back one, please. So these are a bit in more detail. These are priorities that are being considered in greater detail by our selection committee, diving into some of these key criteria. You'll notice some of the key criteria mentioned there that were considered throughout the review process, as well as highlighted by council, such as geography or additional intersectional identities. This time around, given the language in our CARES Act proposal, there's kind of 5 main areas that we are looking through. One is businesses that did not receive enough or additional federal funds, childcare focused businesses, including nonprofits that provide childcare services to the community, use of funds that can help businesses adapt or pivot during this crisis, as well as our existing confirmed priorities of prioritization for Black, Indigenous, Asia-Pacific Islander, and all people of color and or women, as well as businesses for which these resources will help them stay in businesses or retain employees. So while we want to keep these main areas of consideration whole, I will note the selection committee is currently helping us dive into more details around each of these sections. For example, how do we quantify business stability, evaluate businesses making pivots and adaptations? The committee is also helping us weigh certain factors like business size, geography, years in business, and other intersectional identities, and how those different criteria play into these key criteria. Next slide, please. And one more. I think we're a little out of order. So this is just a quick graphic that walks through our overview of the process for the 12 million. You can see businesses are submitting an application through a central place online. The qualified applications are prioritized using vetted criteria. We, after making selections, pass that on to our disbursement partners who are able to work directly with the business owners to get checks in hand. And then after there's some reports and surveying that happens to make sure we are capturing all the outcomes of what the funds are accomplishing in our communities. I'll note that this is separate from our block grants process. Those 3 million, as I mentioned, will be more at the discretion of those disbursement partners who will have more flexibility to run their own processes. And I will also note that that process will follow the $12 million disbursement process, not only so that we can better coordinate with our partners, but so that those partners can prevent duplicative awards and avoid confusion in the small business community. So next slide. I do just want to note before questions that I want to appreciate our cross-departmental team of project managers that's leading this work. That includes Robert Smith, Amy Nagy, and Amy Fleck-Rossetti. And in addition to them, there's over 12, there's a dozen staff internally that are currently supporting this effort and moving at a rapid pace. So appreciate everybody involved.
So
thank you. Go ahead. If you have
sorry, I jumped the gun there. Yes, I did have a quick follow-up question. So with, hey, Tori, Shay, how are you guys doing? I wanted to check on the flexibility of the funding, because obviously for any number of small business owners, given the scale of challenges they have to confront and the nature of their business, nature of the industry, they're going to have to do a lot of retrofits. They're going to have to maybe think about new HVAC systems, new protocols for serving guests, et cetera. What feedback have you been getting around that, the flexibility of funding in that respect? Because that's obviously a challenge at the bank level, which I'm dealing with personally with our bankers right now. So I'm just curious what you've heard from our clients.
Yes, I can share, and I'll let staff weigh in if I miss anything. But to our understanding, these are unrestricted relief dollars. Really, it's for, while we might use some criteria and we might ask questions on how they intend to use the funds as part of the application process, which can help us make decisions, such as owners stating that they want to prioritize supporting employees or make pivots and adaptations. For the most part, the very specific details on how those funds are used, we're trying to be as unpaternalistic as possible in that process.
Thanks, that's good to hear.
It's a great opportunity here. We were so remiss the first few rounds of not having some more funds to disperse, given, just knowing how much demand is out there. I'm wondering, so thousands of people submitted applications in previous rounds, and I think those same thousands are going to want to apply again. I'm hopeful that the application process will be very similar, so it's not another round of work for them. Is any thought given to that?
Yeah, I'll add, the team was just meeting to talk about this morning. We are actually in the process of working with some of the tech elements of our JOT form. Not only do we want to provide some kind of accelerated application processes for past applicants, but also for folks that participated in the Water Bureau SPUR program. So the team is actually working through solutions now that would allow us to provide applicants with a pre-populated form that has most of the
nice.
They've already submitted. So we're hoping to make this as streamlined as possible and reduce application fatigue, because we've heard loud and clear that community businesses are exhausted from filling applications and facing denial.
So does that mean that whoever applied before doesn't have to totally reapply? They can just maybe submit a form saying that they want to apply again?
We will actually be sending folks an individualized email link that leads them to that pre-populated form, because we do need to capture some additional information, but things such as their basic information, demographics, addresses, some of that will already be pre-populated for them.
Okay.
I had a follow-up question with respect to just some metrics to track. I know we have such a wide applicant pool. We have a lot of interest, obviously a lot of need. The harsh reality is already nationwide, globally, we're seeing pretty high business mortality rate, particularly for small businesses. So I think it's important for us as an agency to be tracking that, because that data is largely scattershot. There've been some articles in the press recently about the fact that it's hard to get conclusive data. So I think as a city, we should try our best to do that, because the cost will be there, and it's going to be grim unless Congress gets its act together. So and even then, I think it's going to be very challenging. So I just want us to make sure we're tracking that.
Great. Thanks for the comments and presentation. Quick question. Could you speak a little bit to how things will be handled with our partners and how that arrangement's going to work? They're actually going to make disbursements, correct? And how will that be coordinated between our team and the partners? Will they be paid for this process? I assume they probably will be. And how will all that play out?
It's a great question. So I will note that in our CARES proposal and in the instruction we've received subsequently, it's two different admin rates for partners. For the disbursement process, where we're handling all the applications and making the decisions, so you recall the bulk of the funds, the 12 million, the maximum allowable administrative fee for partners in participating in those funds is 7.5%. And so they really are just taking in the names from us, the information, and then working with the business owner to get the funds out, as well as supporting us with some reporting after the fact. On the block grant process, because the partners are going through their own process, they're designing, it's a little bit more involved. The maximum allowable administrative fee there is 10%. So altogether, the administrative cost for partners is only between 7.5 and 10%, which we know isn't as high as some partners would like, but is still meaningful enough for them to get the work done.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Okay then.
Chair Cruz, if I might.
Yes.
I just want to echo appreciation for the team and for all of our partners. We've talked about this originally when we were trying to get the resources out the door. It was kind of a sprint to, manage the thousands of applications and be responsive and get it out so quickly. And we had terrific partners in doing that. This is of a whole different magnitude, and the team is at it again. And so just like businesses who since March, have been feeling the effects, the team that you see here has been working really hard since March. And so I just want to appreciate them, Amy and Shay and Tori, and the entire team for just so diligently moving this forward for the benefit of a lot of businesses, and as well as our incredible partners with the community chambers and Microenterprise Services of Oregon and Craft 3, and just all of the people who are working really hard. So Robert Smith as well, Lisa Norwood, Ann Mangan, there's just a huge team, and I want to just make sure that they know how much they are appreciated as we go into this next phase. So thank you.
Thanks, team. That's frontline work. That's really important. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And thanks to everybody for your hard work on behalf of the board as well. So, okay, any additional comments or questions? Okay, then would somebody like to make a motion to approve resolution number 7395?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Second?
Second.
Great, thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye or give me a wave. Okay, thank you. I think we're all unanimous again. Thanks very much. Thanks again for all your good work, and I'm delighted to see this additional funding come through. It's great. So next up, item 17 is an action item authorizing the 6th Amendment to the Purchase and Sale Agreement with Bridge Northwest Development for the River Place Parcel 3 project in the North Macadam Tax Increment Finance District. And I believe Eric Jacobson is our presenter on this, and I think he's by himself this time. Are you there, Eric?
Good afternoon again, Chair Cruz and commissioners. Nice to see you again. Great. I am making the presentation myself, but I am also joined on this video call by our partners, Nicole Peterson with Bridge Housing and Siobhan Badeau with Portland Housing Bureau, because delivering kinds of affordable housing projects isn't something that we do alone, and it really takes really good partners to deliver these projects. And that's the really good news here. So we're asking you to approve resolution 7396. And with approval of that, that will hopefully result in the delivery of 176 affordable housing units in the River Place neighborhood. Next slide. So the quick summary is that this will be the 6th Amendment to an option for purchase and sale and development agreement we have with Bridge Housing. And that agreement right now calls for phase 2 to be a market rate housing project. And by approving this amendment, it will change that to allow phase 2 to be an affordable housing project consisting of 178 units, of which 176 of those will be affordable, ground floor commercial space, and at least 64 parking spaces. In addition, as part of this amendment, Prosper Portland will be paid $1.25 million, which is the amount we were underpaid at the phase 1 closing due to a mutual mistake. Next slide. Strategic plan outcomes are to provide for a variety of housing types in our neighborhoods, including affordable housing, and also the partnerships, building upon these partnerships we have with Bridge Housing and the Portland Housing Bureau. Next slide. So the project location, it's about a 2-acre property located at the south end of downtown in the River Place neighborhood, bounded by Southwest River Parkway, Southwest Moody Avenue, and Southwest Harbor Drive. On that 2-acre property, phase 1, which is an affordable housing project called the Vera, has already been constructed on the western portion of that parcel. That project was completed as part of this overall purchase and sale agreement between Bridge Housing and Portland Housing Bureau. And what we're talking about right now for phase 2 is on the eastern half of that property outlined in yellow. Next slide. So here's a rendering of the 2 buildings. Phase 2, what we're talking about today, is shown here on the left. This is looking to the south. And on the right is the rendering of the Vera, which was completed in late 29 and is occupied presently. So what we're talking about today is the phase 2 project on the left. And next slide. And then this is a rendering of the property looking to the north. So in this view, the Vera is shown on the left and phase 2 is on the right. Next slide. So the board report that was presented to you has a very detailed history of how we got to where we are today. I'm going to give you a slightly abbreviated version of that, but I'm happy to answer any questions about some of the more detailed history. So the abbreviated history is this project really started in 2015 when Prosper Portland issued a request for proposals, and Bridge Housing was selected to be the developer for this property at that time. And at that time, Prosper Portland owned the property. At that time, Portland Housing Bureau had enough money to support about 200 units of affordable housing, which is why it was envisioned to be a 2-phase or 2-building project, where one of the buildings would be affordable housing of about 200 units, and the other building was anticipated to be market rate apartments. Between 2015 and 2017, Bridge Housing encountered some financial challenges with putting together the entire financing package for the project. And as a result of those challenges, the project was reconfigured. And that reconfiguration was approved by the Portland City Council in 2017. And what that reconfiguration called for was for Prosper Portland to convey the property to Bridge Housing to convey the property to the Portland Housing Bureau. And for the phase 1 project, Bridge Housing leased that property from the Portland Housing Bureau. And that approval by the Portland City Council also indicated that phase 2 would be an affordable housing project pending Bridge Housing's ability to create a viable financing strategy by December 31st of 2020. So at that time, we did amend our agreement with Bridge Housing. That was the 5th amendment. But at that time, we still called for phase 2 to be a market rate housing because the financing package for the affordable housing wasn't yet put together. So since then, Bridge Housing did move forward and build and construct the phase 1, the Vera, which was completed in late 2019. I'm not sure if you saw it, but Bridge Housing put together a really nice virtual grand opening video for that a couple months ago. We couldn't do it in person because of the COVID pandemic, but it's a really nice video put together showing how many partners it takes to really complete these projects. And then also talks about the end users in terms of people who are or have been homeless or nearly homeless, and how appreciative they are of having this kind of housing available to them. So between 2018 and 2020 now, Bridge Housing and Portland Housing Bureau have been working to put together a financing package for an affordable housing project for phase 2. And they have accomplished that. And that's why we're here today to approve the 6th Amendment, to recognize that there is a viable financing strategy for that phase 2 affordable housing. Next slide. So the phase 2 project, the total cost is approximately $78 million. The program includes 178 apartments, of which 176 will be affordable. There'll be ground floor commercial space and 64 parking spaces. In your board report, there's a fairly detailed breakdown of the units by size and number of bedrooms and affordability rate. I haven't included that here, but it's available for your reference. But just to note that the project also includes a couple of 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units for families. The schedule will be for, if this is approved, Bridge anticipates beginning construction by the end of 2020 and to complete construction by mid-2022, about 18-month construction schedule. Next slide. So there's 2 really equity impacts with this project. First is affordable housing, as we all know, is really important in Portland, and helping to provide that high quality housing to low income households is really important, and a way of closing that gap and providing housing for people. And then the secondly is through the construction business and workforce equity specifications that will apply to construction of this project. And for this project, the Portland Housing Bureau's goal of 30% on the business equity side will apply to this project. Now, in your report, we've provided you the results of the construction and workforce equity that Bridge Housing and their contractor Hoffman achieved on phase 1. And in particular, for the business equity goal, they underachieved. They did not achieve the 20% goal. And in fact, they achieved about 13%. In the report, I identify some explanations for why that happened, some challenges that occurred. One thing that's notable in particular about phase 2 is that Bridge Housing has selected Walsh Construction to be their contractor. And I included in your report some of the results from Walsh Construction's recent projects involving Portland Housing Bureau projects, and their track record with achieving the business and workforce equity goals seems to be quite good. So I think between Walsh's track history with achieving good results and Bridge Housing's kind of learning some lessons from phase 1, we're hoping that the outcomes will be better in terms of the construction equity on phase 2. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this project really goes back to 2015. There's been a considerable amount of public participation and engagement since 2015. But really what I want to talk about is the engagement we did specific to this action item as we went back out to the neighborhood and the neighborhood association to talk about the fact that the city council had in 2017 had indicated this would be affordable housing, and that it took 2 years for Bridge to put the financing package together, and that we were now going to be approving that. And we got 3 or 4 comments back from some residents and individuals. And in your board report, I've summarized those sort of in different categories. And I just want to note also that since the board report was distributed to you, 3 of those individuals submitted additional comments, which I understand have been provided to you yesterday and today. And I would say no new individuals submitted comments. And I would say the 3 individuals who resubmitted comments sort of reiterated their comments and expanded them slightly. So I'll talk about that a little bit. I'm not going to talk about the comments individually in detail, but try to talk about them in groups. But in terms of groups, there were comments on the building design, how it's going to be operated, the broader sort of neighborhood and community public facilities and whether they're adequate in the neighborhood. And then some comments around public health and safety, concern about public health and safety for residents in multifamily apartment buildings like this, given the COVID pandemic. So in terms of building design, it's really important to note that Prosper Portland doesn't typically put in our development agreement specific design elements that need to be included in a development project. We really leave that up to the developer, who really has a vision for the kind of building they want to create, as well as the Bureau of Development Services and the Portland Design Commission to sort of overall work together to come up with a plan and a design that meets the developer's needs, meets the community's needs, and is built to the code specifications. So it's important to note that for this project, there were 2 design advice request sessions and hearings with the Portland Design Commission. And at those, residents and the public is invited to participate and provide comments. And those are considered through that approval process. For this building, the Type 2X design review was approved in 2017, and the building permits were issued in early 2018. So really, in terms of the design of this project, it's really been designed and permitted, and it's really been that project that Bridge has been working to finance for the past 2 years. So some of the comments were, specifically around wanting specific design elements to be included in this building. An example would be a pet area, and that's not included in the project. It wasn't really addressed during the design advice request sessions. It's not required by code. It really wasn't something that was brought up, when this building was permitted. And, so it's not included. We're not proposing to include it. And as one of the comments that we received was that if a pet area weren't included, they were advocating for this to be a no pet building. And I'm not recommending that. I feel like we need to treat residents of affordable housing the same as we treat residents of market rate housing, and it wouldn't be fair to say to residents of an affordable housing project that they're not allowed to have pets. There were some comments that were sort of broad neighborhood and community concern projects about the location of a TriMet bus stop or the frequency of service, whether or not the roads were adequate to support the planned development, and some comments around need for open space, place for kids to play. And one comment actually suggested that this property would be more suited to be a park rather than affordable housing. So those are the kind of comments that, it's really between the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to work with their bureau partners like PBOT and Parks and Recreation to really identify the broad range of planned facilities that are needed in a neighborhood. And for this property, it's been designated for development, and it's really, it's a neighborhood that has good transit service and good parks available. And then third, there were some comments relating to, whether or not the building, since it was designed several years ago, whether that building permit is still valid, whether or not there should be some reconsideration of the design of the building given the COVID-19 pandemic. And I guess I'd say overall, just to verify that the building permit is still valid, the Bureau of Development Services monitors that and is in charge of that. And I think in terms of, the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of Portlanders who live in buildings like this. I don't think there's been a broad call for the building type to be deemed sort of unsafe. And I think Bridge Housing and Nicole can talk about some of the measures they've taken in the buildings they own to address the safety of their residents. Next slide. So with that concludes the presentation. I'm available, as well as Nicole and Siobhan, to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you, Eric. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do.
Please go ahead.
I guess I have a problem with the building not having bathrooms. I mean, not bathrooms, but laundry, like washer and dryers in the unit. Is this the same building we're talking about?
Yes, there were some comments advocating for each apartment to have washer.
Well, I guess if we're talking about low income folks, underserved populations, and we're talking about equity, this is a problem because if they're already low income, they already don't have any money, and to have to go leave their home, and also during COVID, to go to a laundromat, that's not really being equitable. And if this project came to fruition in 2017, isn't there time now to redirect or do what you need to do so that they can have laundry facilities inside their apartment? I'm really, in 2020, we can't have a washer and dryer inside an apartment complex, inside the individual apartments. That's a problem for me. So especially when we're talking about equity, poverty, and all those things wrapped into one.
So let me clarify just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the building does have laundry facilities. There's 2 group laundry rooms in the building, sized to adequately serve the residents in the building. Just that the laundry facilities are not in the individual apartment units.
Oh, I understand that.
So people don't have to go outside. So people don't have to go outside.
But still, during this time, we're in the pandemic is not just a one-time thing. It's something that's going to go on for a while, and even after that. So say that there is a vaccine or whatever, still, when people are in their homes, say they're seniors living there, there are people that may have be in that where they have different underlying conditions where they shouldn't leave their place at all. Again, why can't there be? And I know about the cost and all of that, but if we're talking about true equity and we're talking about true underserved folks and making it so that they can be able to thrive and succeed, then they need to have individual washer and dryer inside their apartment. Inside their apartment, not the building, inside their apartment.
Eric, I think this might be one that it would be good for Nicole and Siobhan speak to in terms of how they cost their units and what that would look like for them.
Oh, I understand all that. I understand the cost totally. and all of that. But I'm just saying that is my thing. And I just wouldn't agree to a building without individual laundry facilities inside. I just think that. Especially when we're talking about true equity, that's not true equity.
Yeah, I would agree in principle. In many ways, if from a business perspective, obviously businesses are busy spending a lot of money, which can be hard to find sometimes to retrofit facilities for very important safety requirements for the age of COVID and post. And so, to me, I think it is. The equity argument is a winning argument in and of itself, but then there's, of course, just the larger public safety argument. We don't want necessarily to be, as an agency, supporting the construction of buildings that pre-COVID were, of course, deemed to be safe, but during this COVID age and post-COVID are going to be, may not meet or exceed the public health standards that we have or will be having as well. And I know the construction industry as a whole is dealing with this, particularly when it comes to public facilities and also HVAC requirements, because it's an airborne or respiratorily transmitted disease as far as we know. So I think these are the types of situations again where it doesn't behoove us, I think, as an agency, even though the costs, of course, are there and we have to work within limited resources, but we really should be looking hard at all options and presenting those options to the commission for us to consider. And rather than as an add-on, as part of the menu, right? These are the choices we have. This is how much it's going to cost. And, doing the right thing typically costs more.
Okay.
So
It'd be helpful to hear from the Housing Bureau. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say maybe Ms. Peterson or Jill Chen or Siobhan Beto from the Housing Bureau would like to jump in at this point.
I'm happy to say a few words on behalf of Bridge Housing. So, first I would just say that this is pretty much the standard for most affordable housing is that we use common laundry rooms. We do that to make the delivery of affordable housing more cost effective. This building was designed and permitted in December of 2017. At that point, we didn't really have an idea that this was going to be an issue with COVID. I agree that it would be nice to have washers and dryers in each unit, but at this point, to make a change like that would be a very large change for our building because it would require us to go back to the drawing board on both the architectural and the mechanical and plumbing side to add the plumbing design and all the ventilation that would require to each individual unit. I would also say that for us, for the life of the building over the long term, we do find that common laundry rooms are a good idea for the asset because, there's often washers and dryers can be the site of the origin of a water leak inside the building. And when you have a common laundry room, you can build the laundry room to that event. So you can slope the floor and put a floor drain in there. And you can sort of manage when there's been a leak, there's been a leak. Whereas when they're in the units, sometimes you actually don't find out until the water starts traveling throughout the building. So there's actually a host of reasons that we have done common laundry rooms. But that being said, I do want to acknowledge it would be nice at this time to have individual washers and dryers in the units. But
so just to interrupt, I think what I personally would like to hear is from a public health perspective, again, because I'm living this right now as a business owner, we're being given very clear instructions about communal spaces, right? Any place that anybody is going to be congregating for any length of time, and of course, doing laundry, you're waiting oftentimes in that laundry room for up to an hour, 2 hours at a time, certainly longer than 15 minutes. And so you're going to have to make sure that everyone's masked, that they have adequate ventilation, the air exchanges in that room are occurring at least 5 or 6 times an hour, right? I mean, these are all the other requirements that, again, from a business perspective, I have to think about and treat my customers as well as my employees who don't live in this building, but certainly work in it in a very strict fashion. And so to me, it's not a question of whether it's nice to have this. I think it is a question of whether we need to have it from a public safety standpoint. And I think it behooves us as an agency, as a commission working with our partners to be asking these hard questions and really thinking hard about what the public health safety standards ought to be, not just what they are right now and how consistent those standards are across the entire city and county. Because if we're going to have one public health safety standard for businesses and another health safety standard for affordable housing, raises a lot of questions.
And one other thing, and I think I heard Mr. Jacob compare some of the things that he was doing to private or more traditional housing. So, and if we're going to compare a part of it, then we need to compare all of it. Yes. And it's not about being nice. It's about being the need of having, especially for families and you have kids, and we have families that are rooming together and it's not safe right now during this quarantine period. And when you look at everything, it is about need, and the need is there. And going from 2017 to 2020, things are 100% different. So how are we adjusting for that to make sure that we're making sure that we're serving the people that we need to serve and that they're getting their needs met? And it's not about niceness. It's about, again, what the need is and making sure that families are safe in their housing that they have.
Can I just mention in here?
Go Go ahead.
Well, I do want to clarify a couple things. Just the first is that the project probably won't be open for 18 to 24 months because it won't be under construction, and it'll be starting construction. So I think I'm wildly hopeful that 12 months from now we are not still in COVID, let alone 18 to 24 months. So I think that's just an important thing for context. And Siobhan can probably speak to what the Housing Bureau is doing across its portfolio. But the other thing that I want to mention is that this is really a Portland Housing Bureau project. And so Prosper Portland is selling for market rate the property to Bridge Housing, and then Bridge Housing and the Housing Bureau are investing significant resources into it. So I just want to make sure that we're clear of sort of what Prosper's role is. We don't have any additional financing, and we are getting pure market rate for it. So that's the context.
Well, Kimberly, I would say since it hasn't been built yet, now's the time to make the adjustments that need to be made so that it can be up to standards that it needs to be. If you haven't even started the process, you can always redesign. I've gone through a building process with assisted living, and we've made adjustments lots of times for seniors that we're serving in those assisted living facilities. So I know that if the construction hasn't started, those things can be adjusted as you're starting to go forward.
At a cost.
Siobhan, you want to go ahead?
So I wish I could tell you that something was happening across the portfolio, but each individual nonprofit development sponsor of these projects has established their own safety protocols, and that's across the portfolio. We don't have a standard that's established. The decision about a community laundry room is the developer's decision. So we don't require in-unit washer and dryers. It would be terrific to have them, but it's not affordable in every project that we invest in.
And by affordable, again, I think we want to, I don't want to belabor the issue too much because I know we've got a loaded agenda and all. We have been through a lot, but I do want us to have a little bit more information at our fingertips, acknowledging that the agency at this point has limited leverage, I guess you could say, with respect to this project. But it is important for us and for me, and whatever extent I'm speaking for Commissioner Studemeyer-Wesley as well, and supporting her in this point. I think there is a need to have some more information about what exactly constitutes affordability, so we understand when we're talking about affordable housing what the actual costs are of creating the kind of housing that myself as a commissioner would feel is appropriate and right, and again acknowledging that 12 months from now, 24 months from now, we may be out of COVID territory. Who knows what the future might bring? What we can anticipate is the future will continue to be uncertain, difficult, particularly for lower income people. And so if we are in the midst of pushing the agency, stretching our comfort zones to become even more equity focused and deploying our resources accordingly, then this is an area that I think we need to look at. So that's, as a commissioner, I'm just asking for that information.
I would agree.
On average.
I have a question for Eric and Siobhan, Siobhan. The Design Commission has to review this. They reviewed this several years ago. Do either of you have any idea what the Design Commission is doing now with respect to this kind of property? Are they requiring any kind of, kind of proactive changes to address COVID concerns and public health concerns, or is it just kind of business as usual with respect to new applicants?
I can only speak to projects.
Go ahead, Sean.
That are currently on my desk in terms of under development, and I am not hearing that there are any such requirements. I'm sure I would be hearing that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. The Design Commission really reviews the exterior of the building. It doesn't really get into the interior of the building. It just has to meet code. So group laundry facilities meet code. And I believe, Nicole, just to verify, the Vera has group laundry facilities in it, correct?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And so, you know, I don't know if you're interested in hearing what our safety protocols are for the group laundry facilities. You know, so for example, none of our residents enter occupied areas without a mask. If they come to those areas, or I'm sorry, common areas without a mask. If they come to those common areas without a mask, then we provide them one immediately. We also have full-time janitorial staff that is going through the spaces and on an hourly basis, wiping down surfaces and door handles, switches, all those things to make sure that folks are not, you know, well, you know, to make sure we're keeping those clean. You can't completely control that. We also have hand sanitizer stations in all the common areas. So at the front door, at the elevator lobbies, in the laundry rooms, in the community room, in the resident services offices, and in the program space, you'll see hand sanitizer stations on the walls. So, you know, that's always available for folks if they feel like they might have touched something to make sure they clean their hands off. And frankly, most of the common areas have been closed down. So people are not gathering in common areas right now. So the community room is not being used as an open community room for people to gather. Instead, what we do is we occasionally will have, you know, food be delivered to the site, and then we have the residents come through one at a time with their mask on to select from the food that's been donated, and then they leave. And so, you know, everything is adjusting to this COVID, and we're trying to keep these buildings safe, but, you know, it is a lot of people in one building. You know, the other, you know, thing that I wanted to say is that the building is very close to closing its financing and to starting construction. We are, you know, in the final months of that, trying to get our final approvals from OHCS on November 6th. And so that's just a few months away. And there's a lot of work to do to get there. At this point, it's not design work so much. It's trying to get all our financial partners to a financial closing. And if we don't close in December, there is an underlying environment caused by COVID that the financial markets have changed. And if we do not get closed by December, our financing terms will be changed for the worst, which will create new gaps in the project. Right now, we're getting some great pre-COVID pricing, like $1 or $2 on our tax credits. If we don't close in December, that tax credit price will probably be closer to 91 cents. So that's going to leave a big gap that would require public funding and create a delay to delivering this housing. So I understand, you know, and it's hard for me to argue against some of the points that are being made because I think they're all important and valid. But, you know, at this point, we're making the choice to move forward to a closing and delivering the housing and not going back and starting over on the design.
Could we, I'm sharing my experience in as a business or a building and business owner here and having to retrofit our own space for safety considerations. And I've learned quite a bit. I've been consulting with a professor over at the U of O Building Lab extensively who specializes in air makeup systems. And we've been doing some research together. We found that the cost, the retrofit cost for roof-mounted makeup air units is rather low for specific kinds of technology that can affordably or relatively affordably improve indoor air environments, particularly in areas like laundry rooms, right? Or in our case, our employee room or downstairs trash rooms or bathrooms for that matter, which oftentimes ironically lack for fresh air flow. But these environments are the ones that are the highest risk environments for airborne or respiratorily transmitted diseases because the air just sits filtered. So I would highly recommend looking into that, I can share my own, what I've learned thus far, and the resources that are available for ASHRAE, which is an association that represents the HVAC contractors. But there's a lot of things that still can be done, that should be done, I think, by responsible building owners. And we're taking upon ourselves to figure out how to do this and finance it. We're finding out it's actually far more affordable than we thought. Which is great. But I would highly urge any of our partners to do the same, because as it turns out, again, digging into the information and the actual studies that are coming out of China and Italy and increasingly here in the States, this is very rarely a disease that is transmitted by hand-to-hand contact or surface contact. Very rarely. It's almost entirely transmitted through airborne respiratory droplets, through aerosols and things of that nature. That's where we need to be focused. And it's precisely those common areas where people are staying and congregating for long periods of time, in excess of 15 minutes, right? Those are the high-risk areas, and it's incumbent on us to identify them, to understand that, and to make the appropriate retrofits as needed, so that, again, we aren't building essentially unsafe housing or participating in that. So I feel very strongly about this, because I've had to live this reality myself and learn a ton in a short amount of time. So I'm happy to share what I've learned, and you guys can take it from there. But I appreciate Commissioner Sotomayor-Wesley for speaking up about this, because I do think these are real lived concerns. And some things that, fortunately, we may not have to confront in our daily lives. But I'm giving you the benefit of my learning for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you've learned, and if you wanted to share some of that information with me. I also wanted to let folks know that we do have fresh makeup air ducted into every single unit directly from the outside, as well as fresh makeup air coming into the corridors directly from the outside. We have operable windows in all the units and in the corridors. And we also have fans in the units that are running 24/7 to ensure that the fresh air is being pulled through and the old air is being moved out. And so, yeah. I think you're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think, all right. So if there are more comments, that's great. We can, Peter?
Sometimes the places where we don't really think about, those are the places we need to start thinking about. So that's my only point there. And I'll send you the information.
Yeah.
And go from there.
So some pretty strong concerns, but also balanced against some timing issues. And I would say probably some opportunity cost in terms of what happens with this property. And, the amendment really calls for the deployment of this property as affordable housing. And so taking it back to square one again, to redesign, re-engineer, and look at, financing all over again might be, I assume might be a deal killer.
Yeah.
So I think that's basically our decision. We could punt on this, but my inclination is to go ahead and call for a vote. See, how the commissioners feel about it. Commissioner Myers, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm going to make it really short. I think that this might be an issue, Kimberly, to bring up to the Economic Impact Task Force on housing, on how we can help maybe find funding for the protocols that are needed in facilities with the Housing Bureau, work with them directly to work with whether they're the property managers or the building owners to create the protocols for the use of common facilities, which if they haven't already been made, then we help develop those on scheduling usage, cleaning between uses, assistance when necessary, social distancing officers, PPE cleaning and hand washing. With that, I think that's where we should punt. That's the piece we should punt, and we should move forward on this.
Okay. Commissioner Gambetti, did you have any comments you want to get in before we take a vote?
No, I mean, I totally appreciate the comments that have been made. I think it's constantly a battle of trying to figure out with limited resources that we have for affordable housing and trying to deliver as much as we can with what we have. And this is a great example of it. I think we are in a crazy time right now where questioning this is absolutely appropriate, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's tough. I mean, I know it's hard to argue against a lot of it, but I'm thrilled to see this project converted to affordable housing, and I want to see more housing delivered. So I'd hate to create a major setback here to accomplishing that. So I'm going to support it. Appreciate the discussion and the energy.
Thank you.
All right. I think we've heard from everybody then on the commission. So why don't we go ahead and call a vote and see where we wind up? Would somebody like excuse me, would someone like to make a motion to approve resolution number 7396?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. So we've had our discussion. So all those in favor? I will vote in favor. Looks like we have 3. I assume we have 2 adverse.
I'm abstaining until we get further clarification on the measures being taken to ensure safety, and particularly airborne or air quality safety of common area spaces, including especially laundry. There are measures, and again, they're not terribly costly. In some cases, a very robust air purifier, remote or room-based air purifier can do wonders. But I think I want to abstain until we have further information about what measures we are going to take. Abstain until we have.
I think we lost you there for a little bit, Peter. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I was just saying I'm going to abstain until I can receive further information about the measures that we are taking to ensure air quality safety, in particular for common area spaces. That to me is critical.
And then Commissioner Stoudemire-Wesley, I am assuming you're voting no on this.
Chair Cruz, I think we might have lost Commissioner Stoudemire-Wesley. It doesn't appear that she's on the call anymore.
Okay. Okay, well, so we have 3 in favor, 1 abstain, and 1 who is not available to vote. So the motion passes with a majority of 3. Thank you for your comments. I guess with respect to Bridge, I'm hoping that you've heard all these comments,
yeah.
and that maybe at some later date we could have an update and some additional feedback as to how some of these thoughts might be incorporated into the project. Obviously, Commission feels very strongly about it, but at the same time, at least 3 of us think that we don't want to lose the opportunity for additional affordable housing. So to the extent that you could maybe respond at some point and help us try to alleviate some of those concerns, that would be great.
Yes, yes. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I'll work with Eric and get those comments addressed.
Super. Thank you very much. It looks like Commissioner Stoudemire-Wesley may be back on the line. Can I just confirm that you're voting no on this item? Okay. Well, we'll just we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and proceed then, and if she comes back, we can confirm later. All right. So last but not least, we have item 18, which is an action item adopting budget amendment number 1 for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020 and ending July 30, 2021, and making appropriations. And Tony Barnes is back with us for our first amendment of the year.
Well,
we can celebrate that. We had a record last year, so we're starting off early this year.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Cruz and Commissioners and Executive Director Branham. I'm Tony Barnes, Finance Manager, Prosper Portland. And today I'm presenting Resolution 7397. It's the first budget amendment for fiscal year 2021. It's a more specific budget amendment that's preceding our planned comprehensive fall revision that will be presented to you in October or November later this year. Next slide, please. The revision recognizes new resources and establishes appropriations for several major items that were on today's agenda and were not included in the adopted 2021 budget, which was adopted in June. The items include resources and appropriations related to the CARES Act Small Business Relief Fund, the Economic Development appropriations related to Economic Development Administration Supplemental Grant Funds, administrative work for the proposed Interstate TIF District Amendment, and the Foster and Spring Water Transportation projects, as well as appropriating an existing U.S. Postal Service site environmental escrow liability fund. Next slide, please. To illustrate the change in resources, the new CARES Act and EDA resources add approximately $16.5 million to federal grants. These resources will likely be transferred to Prosper Portland on an incremental payment approach with the duration of the programs this fiscal year. Other resources being recognized but not appropriated include the $1.25 million being reimbursed to Prosper Portland as part of the purchase and sale agreement for the River Place Parcel 3 project. Total revenue increase is about $17.7 million, totaling $138 million in revenue anticipated for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. The revision establishes new fund and expenditures appropriations for $15 million in CARES Act funding for the small business relief. It also establishes a new fund and expenditure appropriations for $1.5 million in EDA grant resources for the supplemental grant from the EDA for new loans and administration of that program. Staff are also currently engaged in partnership with the Portland Housing Bureau to amend the maximum indebtedness of the Interstate TIF District. The revision appropriates $40,000 in the Interstate TIF District from contingency to support the costs of this project. And PHB will be reimbursing Prosper Portland for approximately 70% of the cost of the amendment. Appropriations are also established in the Lentz District for the updated Foster Streetscape and Spring Water Connector projects. These resources are made available from a release of excess bond resources from the Lentz bond refinancing that occurred earlier this year, last fiscal year. And finally, a revision appropriates $3 million for environmental liability escrow account that was set aside when the U.S. postal site was purchased. This appropriation can only be drawn on to address environmental issues associated with the disposition of the post office sites. The appropriation provides authority if needed, and we don't really anticipate much will be drawn down this particular fiscal year, but it'll be reserved for future fiscal years. Next slide, please. So Exhibit A to the resolution provides a fund-by-fund review of the requested changes. This slide provides a consolidated view of all expenditure appropriations. The budget revisions add in total $16.5 million for CARES Act and EDA loan expenditures to the economic development appropriation lines. Administration is reduced a net $75,000. This reduces $100,000 from personnel that's being moved from administration to the Economic Development Administration development appropriations, and it's offset by a $40,000 increase for the interstate plan amendment. Infrastructure is increased by $1.3 million for the Lentz transportation projects, and property redevelopment is increased by the $3 million for the U.S. Postal Site environmental escrow. And finally, contingency for all funds combined is reduced a net $3 million due to the combined changes in resources and expenditures throughout the different funds. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from anyone? Okay. Well, hearing no questions or comments, thank you, Tony, for your presentation. Would someone like to make a motion to approve number 7397, adopting budget amendment number 1?
So moved.
Thank you. We have a second. Thank you, Commissioner Myers. All right. All those in favor? Looks like we have 4 that I see. If Commissioner Stoudemire Wesley is on the line, could she indicate her approval? Okay, well, we'll circle back with her later, but we have 4 of record. Okay, well, are there any, if there are no additional comments or questions, that concludes our meeting for today. Thanks to everybody for your patience and and hard work, and great job to all the staff and presenters that are still on the line for your great work on this. Oh, Pam, did you have a comment?
Excuse me, Chair Cruz. I believe we moved item 11 to the end of the meeting. Is that correct? Or did we remove it?
Item 11. No, actually, we
voted on the consent agenda already.
Okay, thank you.
We went ahead and voted, yeah. So we already took care of that. Okay, so if there's nothing else then, there being no further items on the agenda, the Prosper Portland Board of Commissioners meeting is now adjourned. And I have my home gavel to do there.